Good morning.
Morning.
You okay?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good. It's very hot down here. Is it very hot up there?
Oh, it's at least 30 degrees now in North Wales.
Oh God. I'm not one for heat, Steve. I'm like a grumpy dog. Hello, Chantal. How are you? While I've got you, Chantal, just for you to know, where Keith is going to bring the terms and conditions of the board committee for university trust status through the board in July, simply as a way of making sure that when we feel we're ready to go, as it were. Does that make sense?
Oh, it says can't deliver the message to your. Oh.
Ah, the chair's arrived. Excellent.
Getting jumpy there, Kevin, that it might have been your turn again.
Gosh.
No, I was just saying it was great to see the chair arrive.
Yeah, I'm so pleased to be here. Does anybody know how to move the chat box out of the middle of your screen?
I don't know how you got it there in the first place, Martin.
I don't know, just this back. No, I don't know what to do with it because it's going to block my view of people's faces, isn't it?
Rachel tends to be the expert on Zoom.
Yeah, it used to come down the side.
Martin, if you click just next to where it says Zoom webinar chat, left click, hold it down, and just move it.
So where do you place the cursor then, Kevin?
Just next to the T of chat, somewhere there, and just.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then just hold it down and just move it to where you want it to be.
I've now got to. I must have expanded it. Wait a minute.
Yeah, not the expansion box, just in the white space.
No, it's now gone to a huge chat screen. What have I done?
Yeah, you got to just expanded it there, Martin. So click on would be two boxes on the right-hand side next to the X. So that's to minimize it.
I'm just going to open the chat again, but it just goes to a blank screen. Okay, so I'll minimize it. Restore down. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
so
with the word chat, just put your cursor where it says chat at the top left.
On chat, because I just tried it to the left of it and it just expanded it. I'll hold it down and see what happens. You think I can now move it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Oh.
Martin,
because that's so important to be able to view that as we go.
Martin, there is another way as well. If you if it's popped out, if you see the three buttons, the three dots, sorry, next to where you type a message, if you select that and scroll down, it says merge to meeting window.
Yeah.
If you select that, it would just come up as the chat option on the right hand side.
That looks better. So it just says Zoom webinar chat, which is currently blank. Somebody type something in just to see that it's working, if you wouldn't mind. I bet it's Estelle. I reckon she's going to. It's Nathan. Well done. Yeah, Nathan says hello and Chris has said morning. That's great.
Just a gentle reminder that we are live at the moment.
That's fine. I don't mind being seen as human.
Good stuff.
No, I'm not embarrassed by that. This is real life, isn't it?
In a couple of minutes, I'll put us live on Facebook.
Okay. No, I'm quite comfortable that people are aware of the fact that this is, new technology for all of us.
Morning, Martin.
Morning, Emrys.
Morning, all. I see you across the top of the screen now.
Yeah, we're up. We are. I've been told politely that we are live. I've already been open about the fact I've been struggling with the technology, but I think that's fine. Rachel, I don't know if you're still there.
Yes, I am.
I just had a message from Paul, who seems to be trying to get into Teams. I don't know what he thinks. I think he may have a.
Okay.
Teams is for this afternoon, isn't it?
Yeah. I'll message him back. He should be coming in on Zoom quite clearly.
Bear with me. I'll just resend the invite to him so that he's got it. It should be in his inbox now.
Yeah. Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Morning, Claire.
Morning, Bethan.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, all.
So nobody's availed themselves of a background which to obscure the house.
I've tried it, but it doesn't work for me. I don't know why.
I think it's probably better without it. It tends to leave you looking slightly illuminated, doesn't it?
Good morning. It's Andy Woodhead.
Good morning, Andy. Hi, Martin Woodford here. I'm chairing the meeting.
Hi, Martin. I'm guesting. I guess I'm a guest for this particular board meeting.
No, you're very welcome. I will introduce you. So I'm so glad you've managed to make the start, because that actually makes it easier.
Oh, good. Yeah, I've done it before. About a year ago, I did.
You came to Cardiff City Hall, didn't you?
I did. That's right. Yeah.
Really
Seems
good.
like a long time ago now.
We've got you scheduled for 10 o'clock for half an hour.
Okay, no problem.
Which will include discussion. So obviously, mindful of time, we may well be able to get ahead of that that timeline. So you're welcome to stay for the whole meeting, of course. But if you decide you want to leave after that, that's entirely your choice.
Yeah, I'll probably leave you guys to it at 10:30. But thank you very much for extending the invitation for me to stay. That's great. Thank you, Martin.
It's it's a pleasure, and it's great that you're joining us. We'll be starting in a minute or so, and we'll see whether we can get ahead of the timeline. So you might get some more of the morning.
Yeah, Ali's asked me to sort of recap on my story and then talk about the effect of the lockdown. Is that correct? Is that how you go?
And I think it's the carers slant on the world that we're interested in. But
I'll be presenting that. My two carers are not used to this kind of forum. I have been because of my career, so I'm not nervous or phased by it. So you've got me, I'm afraid, telling their story as well as mine.
You're amongst friends, but it is going to be out live on. It's a Zoom meeting, so people can join us, and also going out live on Facebook. So
no problem.
Quite a public forum, so it's very, very brave of you to join us.
Yep, no problem.
I'm just waiting for the signal, and we will start. Okay, folks.
Bear with me, Martin. It's just loading up.
Okay, don't worry. You just give me the nod, and then we'll start. I mean, people can join us. I see we've got Jason, Emrys, Kevin. I think we're Corat for sure. Bethan, Chris.
Great. We're now live on Facebook.
Okay, you happy, Rachel, for us to kick off? You're all clear at your end?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, well, Bore da, croeso, good morning, and welcome to the second live board meeting, virtual board meeting for the Welsh Ambulance Service. I'm aware that as of this moment, public members of the public, colleagues and so on are joining us both on Zoom and on Facebook Live, which is brilliant. We're extending the experiment that we undertook for the first time at our May board meeting. So it's a pleasure to welcome you all. And a reminder for those participating in the meeting, obviously with our public viewers, important that you take that into account when presenting or making comments, because we do tend to use abbreviations that can be obscure. This is a meeting in public, not a public meeting as such, which means that members of the public watching in can't participate in the meeting. However, what we have done as an extension from last time, we've invited members of the public to submit questions in advance. When I come onto the agenda, you'll see that we've afforded ourselves a slot partway through the meeting at 11:10, assuming we run to time, to answer those questions from the public. So we're very much looking forward to that. So that's an extension to what we did before. So we've taken questions in advance. Just wanted to say thank you, Rachel, for setting all this up. Obviously quite a logistic challenge for us all, and I'm sure it'll go very smoothly. If I have technical problems, I'm pleased to say that Kevin Davis, our Vice Chair, will step in as he did last time when my internet sadly failed me. A reminder that the meeting is being audio recorded so that we can, not least amongst other things, keep a record and produce our minutes. For those of you who are participants as board members and stakeholders in the meeting, just a reminder in terms of sound that if you're not speaking, probably best to be on mute, because that will mean any background noise is taken out. If you're worried about your own broadband, video off is probably helpful. That will lessen the burden. Feel free to use the chat facility alongside the screen to signal comments that you want to make, or to signal that you want to speak. So if you put your hands up through the chat, please, because then I can keep an eye on that as we go. More on the agenda when we get onto my introduction, which will follow quite shortly. But I did want to extend a number of welcomes to this meeting. Andy Woodhead has very kindly joined us this morning to talk about his experiences during the lockdown. Many of you will remember Andy, who came to one of our board sessions about a year ago to talk about his experiences with dementia. So welcome to you, Andy. I know you're staying for part of the meeting. We look forward to hearing from you a bit further on. Great to see you here.
Okay, thank you very much.
I believe Stephen Harry is joining us. Stephen is our Chief Ambulance Services Commissioner. I don't know if we have you there, Stephen. We'll expect, I think, Stephen during the course of the meeting. And also pleased to say that Anthony Veal from Audit Wales, if he's not here now, will be joining us for the item on the annual accounts and annual report a bit further on. So I'd like to welcome him. People will just arrive, and those are the people that we are expecting. In terms of apologies, I've not had any formal apologies other than that if Damon Turner is not attending today, then we will record his apologies in the minutes. Are there any other apologies, Steve, that you've picked up?
No, none received, Chair.
Okay, so we'll assume that if we're not a full house now, we will be as people manage to connect in. Yeah, we've got Damon's apologies from Nathan. Thank you, Nathan. So let's move on. The next item is, you'll see what we've done, and I'll talk about the agenda in a second, is put a lot of the procedural business at the end so we can get straight into the meat of things. But we do need to log any declarations of interest before we proceed. So you'll see there standing declarations for Emrys, Kevin, Nathan and Chantel for the record. Are there any other declarations that we need to cover? Are we all happy? Okay. In which case, we'll move on into, bizarrely, my introductions. Having started, then conducted a business item, you're back to me again. But I wanted to keep this short today because we have got quite a lot to get through. And you'll see that it's quite tight towards the end of the meeting. So maybe with a fair wind that we actually get ahead of our timeline. So a few words from me, and I wanted to perhaps draw out some of the points about what we're covering on the agenda. Before I do that, very quickly, I've been looking at my diary over the last month since we last met. A plethora of discussions and meetings with the Minister, with fellow Health Board chairs, with senior Health Board colleagues at Swansea Bay, with the NHS Confederation, trade union partners, the North Wales Regional Leadership Board, which is a strategic forum. These meetings all reflect the fact that, I'm going to pause, folks, for that phone to stop. My apologies. North Wales Regional Leadership Board, a number of meetings that have occurred over the last month, all reflect the fact in the way they've been conducted, that we are starting to emerge from the preoccupation with the pandemic, that we're starting to see a return to a wider arena of business, which in a way is much more challenging for us because quite clearly coronavirus has not gone away, it's still with us, but we have to accommodate the fact that a number of activities are now resuming, which makes it a real challenge. And I think that reflects in the agenda for today's meeting, which I wanted to move on to. Because when you look at it, and I'm thinking particularly of our public audience here, it's much closer to the agendas you might see or have seen a few months ago before the coronavirus was present. And I just wanted to draw out some highlights of that agenda so that particularly our public viewers can see the salient points. First of all, I think the Chief Executive's report, which we'll move on to very shortly, is a very welcome introduction, a comprehensive report, which if you ever needed to know what's going on in the organisation and what we're about, that report and what Jason has to say about it will be of great interest. Because it covers such a huge range of activity. Secondly, I wanted to highlight, which is early on in our agenda, our patient story from Andy Woodhead, because it's important that we as a board stay grounded in our patients' experience, in the experience of our public, and learn lessons from that. So we've got half an hour set aside to hear from Andy and to have some discussion about the implication for us. And I think that's probably the most important item on our agenda at every meeting. And then further down the agenda, I think you go into a territory of looking back with our annual accounts and our accountability statement, which we have to agree. And it may sound dry and tedious, but actually it's hugely important. It's about evidencing how we spent our resources, whether we achieved value for money, how we conducted our business, and providing assurance to public stakeholders and Welsh Government that our affairs were conducted in good fashion and in order. And of course, having our auditors here is an important part of that. So that retrospective look is an important part of today's business. Then, of course, later on, after just before the break, we will pick up questions from the public that have been asked in advance. A real experiment and a real chance again to connect with issues that are in the public mind. And in this case, today, I think we've got a theme around volunteers and community first responders, which we want to pick up on. And after the break, which we'll take partway through, we go into what looked like a fairly standard array of performance reports. A reminder there, quite clearly, what we're looking at is sustaining our day-to-day performance in a context where coronavirus is still present. But what you'll also see, particularly under the IMTP report, is the start of looking ahead to consider those activities that we are reinstating and how we begin to address some of the key priorities that lie ahead of us. So I think that's an important staging post for us today. And then at the very end, we take some what are labelled the procedural and consent items. But I did just want to flag that tucked away in there at the end is the completion of the governance loop for the pay agreement that at a very high level as a board we have reached with our trade union partners. There are formalities to address in terms of the detail of that agreement, but in terms of principle, the board and trade union partners together have reached an agreement which is now being worked through in more detail. So we will be closing the loop on that in governance terms at the end of the meeting. And I just wanted to put on record my thanks to our TU partners for enabling us to reach that point. So I think an exciting meeting, a lot to look for. And if you remember, the public and can't stay with us for all of it, we have front-ended the agenda in large part so that you can get the most significant items, I guess, early on if you have to leave us. But without further ado, with apologies for that telephone ringing at exactly the wrong time, I'll pass over to you, Jason, for your CEO's report.
Thanks, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. So we've got, as you trailed, Martin, the regular report, slightly shorter this time than perhaps normal, on the basis that we've met a bit more regularly over the last couple of months and focused particularly on COVID activity, and obviously during that response phase to the pandemic. A lot of our routine business has been on hold, but nonetheless, there's a few items I just want to draw colleagues' attention to in this report. So I want to start, perhaps before I get into the body of report, just by noting that it is Armed Forces Week this week. The board will be aware of the fact that we are a signatory to the Armed Forces Covenant, and we did that last year, and indeed later today we'll be hosting an event specifically designed for Armed Forces colleagues who are looking to leave the services, and discuss with those that are interested in their future career in joining the ambulance sector. So just one thing we're doing this week amongst a range of others to both recognise and support Armed Forces colleagues. And those of you that are active on social media will have seen my video earlier in the week paying particular thanks to the support we've had from the Armed Forces during our response to the pandemic in the last 3 months or so, where we've seen in excess of 100 defence personnel deployed with us on a 24/7 basis, assisting us to continue to provide great care to the community across Wales. So I think it's right just in Armed Forces Week to note that and pay tribute and offer thanks to both the Defence Forces and also reservists, who, of course, there are many in our organisation as part of Team West that are also reservists in the forces. In terms of the report, if I can take us first to page 3 and the section on infection prevention control, which starts at paragraph 6. There's just 2 things I want to highlight to board colleagues here. The first being that through the pandemic, we've had to respond rapidly, be agile, and also put a lot of additional resource into infection prevention and control. And I think it's fair to say that has highlighted to us that this will need to be an area of investment for us as an organisation as we go forward, and we'll be bringing forward proposals in that regard. Through the pandemic, we've worked rapidly and actually led some work across the UK ambulance sector, as you can see in paragraph 8 there, which is around rapid sanitisation and cleaning or decontamination of vehicles and what equipment we can perhaps develop with that. And we've been working with universities and defence actually in some solutions to that. And it's right to say that Defence have assisted us with decontamination of soiled vehicles also through the pandemic. So I think the point just to highlight from this for board colleagues is that we've had to put considerable effort and capacity into IPC beyond our normal capacity over the last 3 months, and as COVID will be with us for some time yet, we will need to further invest in IPC. The next area is immediately underneath that I just want to highlight, and this is safeguarding. So vulnerability and the impact of the pandemic is a live issue for us now, not only as we begin to emerge from lockdown and the control measures are eased further, particularly here we're thinking about safeguarding issues relating to children, domestic abuse, and so on. And we are actively engaged with emergency service and other colleagues across Wales here in raising awareness amongst our people of the likelihood of increased reporting or increased instance of safeguarding concerns and how we should respond and signpost people to the support that's available. But there's also a long-term issue which will inevitably emerge as a result of the last 3 months of lockdown, which we continue to work with partners on. Which takes me, if I can, to page 6, and here in the section under strategy planning and performance, starting at paragraph 30, business continuity and recovery planning. So the board will be aware that the cell structure we've had in place as part of our command, control and coordination arrangements for the response phase to the pandemic continues to meet. And it's fair to say now that probably the most active group or cell is the business continuity and recovery planning cell, because as we emerge from our response phase, we've got a number of things that we need to do, not only as I've just touched on in regards to our future kind of infection prevention and control arrangements, but how we return staff safely to the workplace who have been working from home for many months, how we reconfigure some of our premises, how we ensure that they're COVID secure, and so on. So the business continuity and recovery cell has been undertaking an individual site-specific risk assessment process. So of course, given we've got 100 points of presence, or just about 100 points of presence across Wales, each of those premises will be subject to individual risk assessment to identify what measures we need to take to ensure they are COVID secure. And after that, staff, particularly in headquarters and administrative roles, will then start to return to the workplace in a phased and controlled way. So we aren't expecting or indeed wanting everyone to return all en masse, and we will continue to see a number of staff and departments work from home and work remotely in the coming months. The next section I just want to highlight for board colleagues is on page 8, and this is in relation to recruitment. And again, board colleagues will be aware that at the beginning of the pandemic, when we activated our response plan, I set out 2 priorities for the organisation. One was the response to the pandemic and achieving or delivering our strategy that we set ourselves for that. And the second one was to continue with recruitment to deliver on the year 1 growth from the demand and capacity review for EMS. And it's pleasing to report that we are over halfway through, or we've achieved, despite the pandemic and our focus on response, we've achieved over 50% of that recruitment to grow the organisation in EMS by a minimum of 136 people this year. So that's a good achievement, I think, despite the distraction that we've had with the response to COVID, and of course the additional recruitment we've had to do to respond to COVID. So not only the recruitment team through workforce, but also the training and the education team as part of the same directorate have been working very hard to achieve that. And I think we should just note that, Chairman, that's good progress for us and will place us in a much stronger position as we come out of the response phase to the pandemic and go into winter. The next point I just want to highlight again is on page 8, and this is in relation to the education and training of staff through the pandemic. And colleagues will remember that informally I've shared with you quite a significant change that's taken place into how we deliver new entrant training. So the board will will be familiar with the fact that, you know, before the pandemic struck, we were bringing all of our recruits into classrooms all across Wales. Those candidates were travelling. There were accommodation issues in terms of the distance they were travelling from home, and they were all in classrooms. As the pandemic struck, again, the education team have responded exceptionally well, and we've now got essentially new entrant training taking place digitally, similar to today's board meeting, where the lion's share of the education is taking place virtually online, with candidates coming together for practical sessions only when that's necessary to do. So again, I think, Chairman, we should call out as a board the great work that the education team have done is in shifting how we go about delivering education through the pandemic. And of course, this is something we are going to want to continue with. The feedback from those candidates has been exceptionally good. It's much more flexible and agile for them in terms of their style of learning. And of course, all the sessions are recorded so they can play them back at a time that suits them. So feedback from the candidates, certainly when I spoke to them a couple of months ago, was very good. Also on page 8, immediately under that, now at paragraph 43, I just want to highlight well-being. So here, quite a lot of work continues to be undertaken in supporting our people and recognising their individual needs by growing the range of welfare options or support options we have available to them. We've now got a consultant clinical psychologist working inside the organisation, which is a great step forward for us in assisting Claire and the workforce team with our wellbeing strategy. And the board will also be aware that we've recently been pleased to welcome Reverend Mike, who's joined us as our first vicar inside the organisation on a voluntary basis, but offering pastoral support to those who want to access that. So another addition to the range of options or choices that we offer our people in terms of their welfare support, which has been increasingly important over the last 3 months, and we know will be more important as we come out of the response phase to the pandemic. And then the final 2 things I'd just like to highlight from the report are on page 11, and this is in relation to work commencing on the Cardiff Make Ready depot from Monday, I think. Chris will probably nod, but it's the 29th of June I understand that we'll have shovels in the ground and construction work commencing on the Cardiff Make Ready depot, which is a new station, new operational ambulance station, which of course is a great step forward for us. And then the final thing to say is that board colleagues will remember that in our meeting in January, we approved capital investment monies to procure and issue on a personal issue basis iPads to all staff. That's now commenced. The rollout of those devices has now commenced and will conclude early in August. So that's just about 3,500 personal issue iPads going out to our frontline clinicians. So that's all I've got to say on the paper, Martin. The only other thing I just want to add is that board colleagues will probably be aware or should be aware that earlier in the month I issued a statement internally on the Black Lives Matter issue. The intent behind this statement was to generate a conversation inside the organisation, enabling us to, have more open and honest conversations. Board colleagues will be aware that we're refreshing our behaviours following feedback through the roadshow session last year. The Workforce Directorate have that in hand, and of course we've got leadership development training also coming, which will focus very much on continuing our journey of ensuring that we are open, we offer a safe space, safe workspace for all of our people, and that we continue to focus on and ensure that we are both, open, diverse, diverse and offer equality of opportunity, so all of our people can be the best they can. And all of this work is encompassed and underpinned by our strategic equality plan, which all colleagues will remember we saw last time we met. So I'll pause there, Martin, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Really good report, got to say, and a great introduction. And I'm glad you mentioned Black Lives Matter at the end of that. Very important item. We'll put it open for comments and questions. I can see, Kevin, you're making a point there about infection prevention and our ability to sustain that piece with the military support being wound down, if you like. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything on that point, Jason, as that's the first comment up.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So I mean, there are two aspects to the support we've had from defence colleagues over the last couple of months in regards to IPC. The first area is being wound down as we speak now. One is continuing into July, and we are developing proposals to sustain that beyond then. So it links to the point that I made, that it's likely it will be an area we are going to have to invest in, and those proposals are being developed currently.
Thank you. I think Bethan, you had a comment to make.
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. My comment relates to paragraph 5 of your report, Jason, around mental health. And obviously we'll all recall having quite a detailed discussion of the positive nature of the work that the team have done around supporting people with their mental health during the pandemic. I note from your report that the mental health desk has ceased now yesterday, although there will be a rapid evaluation of this in July. I'm just wanting to understand a little more of that, really.
Okay, thanks, Bethan. So I might ask Claire Roach to comment more on this. I think at a high level, Bethan, there's two things going on. One is, we had our own clinicians and indeed others from across the system deployed to, provide professional advice to 999 callers in mental health crisis. That, as the report suggests or says, is coming to a close now as we come out of the pandemic. We will internally review that for lessons identified, best practice, and then to inform, which is probably where Claire may want to comment, and indeed Stephen Harry, who's joined us as our Chief Ambulance Service Commissioner, that will then inform or go into an ongoing review, which is being led by the NCCU on access to mental health. So Claire, do you want to comment first?
Yes, thanks, Jason. I suppose I would just strengthen what you've said, really, that, absolutely this was an opportunity for us to be able to actually test in practice how the value of clinicians within our contact centres and on our clinical desk really made in terms of people seeking that support for mental health, and hence why we are doing a very rapid evaluation to be able to build on that work and to be able to bring the lessons that we learnt initially through to the executive team, but that will come to the board following that in terms of what was learnt and how can we build on that. But it is absolutely about us working in partnership with our colleagues in the commissioning unit as part of the mental health access review, and indeed many of those colleagues actually supported us clinically during the pandemic, so it provided us with a unique opportunity actually to learn in a very practical way.
Thank you, Claire. I wanted to welcome Stephen Harry, our Commissioner. Welcome, Stephen, and thanks for joining us. I don't know whether you had any comment on this particular subject, as Jason mentioned your name.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, apologies I was late, everybody. My normal fight with technology, and usually for me, technology usually wins. So I was pleasantly surprised to eventually get in. So good morning, everybody. Yes, as we said, Shane Mills within the NCCU is leading this access review. We're engaging with colleagues across many sectors in that, and I think Shane's got an early first start in terms of a presentation, which if it's of interest, we're very happy to circulate around to everybody just so they get a flavour of that. So happy to do that, Chair. and thanks for the support that we've had from colleagues within WAST on the review. That's been extremely important to us when we're undertaking the review.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I think that presentation would be useful. And Bethan, you beat me to it with that point about mental health. So probably the most important issue tucked away in the report in a way, isn't it? So thank you. Indeed. Thank you so much for raising it. I'm very conscious of time, and I'm not seeing any questions coming up in the chat function. Are there any other points people want to make? We could spend a day on this in reality because it's such a range of activities, but it's all there on the page, I think. Are we happy to move on? Claire Vaughan, just before we do.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. Sorry.
That's all right.
So can I just say just a couple of quick things? Just firstly, thanks to Jason for calling out a lot of the work that the team has done over the past couple of months. They have particularly responded incredibly well and incredibly positive and incredibly can-do. And we explored some of that at the People and Culture Committee the other day. And received a more detailed report on that, which is available for colleagues who weren't at that meeting to read at their leisure. Just to say that we will see the first cohort of digital EMTs come out very soon. They are due to complete their training imminently. We'll be having a virtual ceremony for them, graduation ceremony, and I think the team are very keen to then evaluate the impact of that education. We have been evaluating it across the piece as we've been going through the course, but then it will be about the impact that they will have coming out, just to ensure that there has been no detriment to their training as a consequence of moving virtually. I am confident that there has not, and the quality of that cohort coming through seems to be very high indeed. So that's one positive to note, and we will keep the board and committee structures informed of that. And the second point is just to let the board know that we are actively working on the wellbeing strategy. So you will recall that we had promised to bring through a draft of a wellbeing strategy earlier on this year. That was paused. The drafting of the strategy itself, not the work that Jason is talking about, in order to make sure that our people out there are supported. But we will now see, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, a draft of our wellbeing strategy come forward for further discussion and engagement across the organisation and with the board itself, with the hopes that we'll be able to bring that through for some approval in autumn. So I just wanted to let the board know that as well.
That's brilliant, thank you. That is welcome. We'll look forward to that. July board, do you think, will it surface at that stage or a bit further on?
I think we're aiming for July People and Culture Committee in the first instance, and then we'll look at a programme then of touch points, engagement touch points throughout. Then it'll take us into autumn.
Excellent, good news. Okay, I'm gonna draw the discussion to perhaps a premature close. I'm learning the vagaries of chairmanship with the risk of a phone going off and emails coming in that mute is going to be needed when I'm not talking. Anyway, let's press on. I'm still here. Like to bring Andy back in, who I welcomed at the beginning for our patient story. Andy's presented to us previously about a year ago at one of our board events in Cardiff City Hall, if I recall, and it's been a very honest exponent of his experiences with dementia. So welcome to you, Andy. I think today you're going to give us your insights into life during lockdown, thinking also in the wider perspective of carers, those who support you, which I think will open up a discussion for us about how those experiences impact on our service and how we need to respond. But I won't say any more, but pass over to you for anything you want to cover.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. As the chairman has just said, I've met most of you before. Emrys I know, because Emrys lives in the same village as I do. That's Oakmore by Sea. I thought I'd sort of do a very quick recap on me and my issues with dementia. and a little bit of the background, and then talk specifically about some of the issues that we've had as a household during the lockdown. And I've got the feedback from my carers, so I will be very honest in feeding back what they have said, good and bad, about the issues that they've had with me. The other fortunate thing is that I'm an ambassador and Dementia Voice for the Alzheimer's Society, so I've got some very good statistics from them on the more general issues that result from that people with dementia have had. Me, I was diagnosed 7 years ago with Lewy body dementia. I presented, Lewy body is always diagnosed early because people present because they've got a tremor. I had a shake in my left hand, which the GP thought could be Parkinson's or it could be non-specific. I had all the tests for that particular condition, and it turned out anyway it wasn't Parkinson's disease, it was Lewy body dementia. Things have moved on a little bit since then. I now have a further diagnosis, which is that I probably have mixed dementia, in that this is combined with vascular dementia. I have been rushed into hospital a couple of times with TIAs or other sorts of, well, something more serious than a TIA, but I would call it a slight stroke, although I'm told by most clinicians there's no such thing as a slight stroke. My initial background is I was a director of a European multinational company. I'm a PhD lawyer. I have no clinical expertise whatsoever. My specialisms are European Union law and employment law. So those were the sorts of areas that I was involved in as a director, although I looked at issues like health and safety training, etc. I'm cared for at home by my partner, who's now my husband, and my son, who is 27 years old. They have had it not too easy after several weeks. The problems that they've had to deal with really is, I think, as a result of, I think, boredom. Things have been described as like treading on eggshells for them. Nothing that they could do. Sometimes on a bad day for me, we have good and bad days, or I have good and bad days, but people with dementia have good and bad days. And they've had to deal with certain issues. Apparently I don't communicate as much as I was before the lockdown. I've been involved in a number of things apart from the Alzheimer's Society. In fact, I've done some voluntary work for the Welsh Ambulance Trust on your blue light strategy. So I've been involved in training the first responders, not just for the Welsh Ambulance Trust, but also for the police, fire rescue, Coast Guard, and mountain rescue, which I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed. It's something which keeps the brain active. So things like that I've missed because I've kept myself deliberately pretty busy. And of course, most of that has stopped, although I've been involved in Zoom meetings. I'm confined to the house. I'm also shielding because of another underlying health condition, which has made things doubly difficult. So all the good news that people are getting now about relaxation of the lockdown don't really apply to me. I've had a letter saying that I'm still in lockdown until the 16th of August. So that hasn't helped much in terms of my mood. But I have, I think, probably isolated myself, not just from the outside, but also from people in the home as well, which they have found difficult. Dementia is a diagnosis that unfortunately doesn't just affect an individual, it affects a family. It is a terrible disease. It is incurable. I have to say, I'm not brave. Following my initial diagnosis, I went into I think a severe depression, and decided that what was I going to do about that? I was going to either just sit and wait for things to happen, or I was going to get out there, take it a day at a time, and do what I could to make people aware of what it's like living with dementia. My carers have had no respite, so that's been difficult for them. By respite, I mean the ability, if you like, to go out to the pub for a couple of hours and perhaps get away from me, or to have someone else for me to go out with, for them to drop me off maybe, and have some time with friends. So that's disappeared, and that it's one of the expressions that's been used is like treading on eggshells. I think that's gone both ways. I feel the same for myself, because I think the frustrations are two-way, and it is extremely difficult. The other problem, and I know it's a common one because I still talk to colleagues and friends via Zoom meetings about some of the issues that they're having, is sleep disturbance. Mine has got worse, basically because I'm not doing enough to get tired. So it's a real problem when you can't sleep well at night, and you're wandering around looking for things to do when everybody else in the house is trying to get some sleep. Not that I'm making noises, but clearly if they hear me walking around, you know, they wonder what's wrong with me. So to deal with that, we've been trying to find things to do. My son has been pretty good at that. He's been, we've been getting little jobs done around the inside of the house, and I can't get involved in what's going on outside, but we've got people outside the house that are repairing issues of storm damage from the winter. So you know, I can't get involved in that, but it's people milling around outside that have I think been good as well for me. My husband, we had a crisis several years ago when the caring role changed. I think there was a dramatic change in the power dynamic in the household. I'm not sure whether that's the right word to use, because I wasn't all powerful, and it certainly wasn't the dictatorship of Dr. Woodhead in this household. But I had to rely on other people to do things for me, and that was very difficult. And I would lose my temper because I felt people were trying to control my life, etc. These are the sorts of things that I guess others feel. And as a result of that, I would get agitated and I would get depressed. But my husband, following that crisis, we got in touch with the Alzheimer's Society, and it was probably early in my involvement with the Alzheimer's Society, and they run a course called Understanding Dementia, and that's helped enormously him and other carers, because it does tell them the do's and don'ts in regards to how to handle people with dementia. It's something which will now be introduced in the nursing degree courses. I've been involved because I've had a long academic background. I've been involved in revising the nursing degrees in Wales, the BSc, the 4 BSc nursing courses, and also the MSc nursing courses. Basically, trying to introduce more people-centred issues rather than perhaps a lot more of the clinical issues that they've been involved in. And also, I was surprised to see that I think the General Nursing Council wanted to see some legal things added as well. So we talked about human rights law, the rights of the individual, discrimination law, etc., which obviously was putting me back on home territory. So that was that was quite nice. So we are doing things to try and improve care, but care in the Woodhead household, dare I say, hasn't been too catastrophic, but it has been very, very difficult. The Alzheimer's Society have obviously picked up on the issues that are coming through really via their call centre. And there are a number of people that are in crisis. And I noticed earlier you talked about mental health, and the mental health of carers has been an issue, and an increasing number of carers have been calling the helpline, not just people who've recently been diagnosed with dementia or are having problems because they're living with dementia and perhaps living alone. The statistics that I think you might find useful, I'm trying to go as quickly as I can because I'm appreciating that I don't have much time, is that 78% of people affected by dementia say that the coronavirus pandemic has made them feel more lonely or isolated than before. And I think that's something that I've reflected, and the effect of that on my own carers. So that's something that I think is perhaps worth raising. Also, around half, 46% in their survey say they are struggling to cope in the current crisis. That's carers. So that's nearly half that are struggling. I think being with someone 24/7 when you've not been used to it under normal circumstances is probably difficult. But I think when you're having to live in a house with someone who has dementia, not just dementia, but other issues as well, is difficult. And the interesting one, and this is one that I've felt as well, is that over 26% of people with dementia symptoms feel that the lockdown has actually made their condition worse, and perhaps they feel it's developing more quickly. I think it's going to be very difficult for the carers to, now the lockdown is over, to reintroduce the people that they look after back into the community again, because there is a sort of a loss of confidence, which is extremely important, of actually getting back out there, if you like, and talking to groups of people. I feel that's one that I'm able to empathise with, because it's one that I am able to feel myself. Long periods of isolation and the loss of routine, which is extremely important to someone with dementia. You have to invent a new one under lockdown. Can be damaging. particularly to the well-being of the person living with dementia, but also the carer and their mental health. So I was pleased that you actually mentioned that. I think I've probably covered in brief, because I'm aware that people want to ask questions or may want to ask questions. That I've covered most of the points, but I'll end with one quote, which is it's come through from a number of individuals, and I'd make it my own as well. I worry now that when the lockdown is over, I will have lost the confidence to go out and find it difficult to adjust to the normal way of life. So I will actually close on that one.
Andy, thank you. That was a brilliant presentation. So much insight and honesty there, and a reminder amongst it all that you know, this could be about our own staff who may be themselves carers. It may be the patients and public that we serve as well, and allowing for the situations that you describe. And I can equate with a lot of that, having had a father who sadly had dementia in his later years. So really good, difficult but good to hear. And you'll be pleased to know we've got a lot of people want to make comments and ask questions. So I'll start with you, Andy Swinburne.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Morning, Andy, and thank you very much for your talk there. Really interesting. I wondered, have you used any health care during the process of the lockdown, and if so, how have you found it?
I have. There are two occasions when I should have gone into hospital, not to do with dementia, to do with other issues, and I flatly refused to go because I was terrified of going to the hospital because I thought I was going to catch coronavirus. One relates to an endoscopy, which is a repeat endoscopy, which is overdue, and the other one, I've had shingles which went into my eye, and I know because I've had it before, you have to go and see the eye consultant as a referral from the GP straight away. So I didn't refer myself. So I think my problem, Andy, has probably been a fear of needing the healthcare. One thing I didn't say in terms of PPE, I live in the Vale of Glamorgan. It's a bit of a postcode lottery, but I know PPE has been a big issue, particularly for care homes, but also I think for people living and being cared for in their own homes. But I've not had an issue at all. I'm pleased to say the provision of PPE by the local authority has been excellent. Is that your question, Andy? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Andy.
I think it's difficult here with two Andys, isn't it? Andy, the presenter. We just had a question on Facebook which we could put to you actually as a sequel to what we just talked about, which is there anything that the Welsh Ambulance Service could have done for you to improve your experience during lockdown, or is that perhaps too far removed from your situation? I think Charlotte on Facebook has asked that, so I thought I'd throw it in to see what you thought.
If I'd had rushed into hospital, I think there was a lot that they could have done, and I'm pleased to say that I've been involved in the training of your paramedics. So I've done a number of training videos for the Welsh Ambulance Service. There's Andy's story. Also, I've been involved in the ITN documentary, which the Welsh Ambulance Trust was due to premiere for the opening of the World Dementia Conference. So if I had needed to be taken into hospital, I would like to think that there was a lot that the Welsh Ambulance Service could have done for me. And as a result of the recent training that I know Ali Johnson and her team have been doing, I think I would be quite confident that they would do that well. You know, I talked about my nervousness about the hospital, but I think having met so many paramedics now and your telephone teams, there is a real sort of change in attitude. We train large groups, starting with dementia friends, and then we talk more generally about dementia story. And you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, that obviously you've been affected as a family by dementia, and one of the things that comes out of that is that there are very few families that haven't been touched in some way by dementia, and it's quite what can I say, encouraging to see that there's a lot of empathy there as a result of that.
That's really, really helpful, actually. It's actually words of encouragement to us that, from what you're describing, you think we're doing the right thing. Kevin, I don't know whether you wanted to come in at this point, because you were talking about confidence.
Yeah.
Yes, Andy, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to listen to you. I'm just taken by your comments about confidence and how regaining confidence to go back out in the community is going to be so important. And of course, it's not just people that are in your situation, it's other people who are shielding for other reasons. They're going to have a confidence issue perhaps as well. I just wondered whether you had any ideas about what would help you in regaining that confidence, and perhaps what might help other people as a consequence of your experience.
I think doing it gradually will help. I have had conversations with people from the top of my drive to the gate. Their friends. That has helped sort of regaining that. So that's been something that's been available. And I have to say, I have twice driven into Tesco's with my partner. I don't go into Tesco's, obviously, because I'm not allowed, but I sit in the car. So I'm trying to do things like that. But I think there are some people who are going to have serious problems. I hope I don't, but I understand if people have got real fears about going back out there again, particularly as I appreciate that dementia is a journey. We take it day by day, but each day, each week, each month, each year, you know, we get a little bit worse. For some, it's a very fast journey, depending on which form of dementia you have. Most of you will probably be aware of Alzheimer's. That's at various speeds. PICS dementia, which is probably the worst one to have, and there are over 100. That is extremely fast and extremely sad. And there are also dementias that affect children. So of course, I think I always try and highlight, and I'm glad I've suddenly remembered it. Dementia isn't an old person's disease. It affects people of all ages, even children, although it's extremely rare in children. But there are types of dementia that can affect people in childhood.
I think you're telling us that it's an individual journey, I think, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Really helpful and gradual. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What I can say is you can't teach. I always, when I do the training for the nurses, I train the nurses in 2 of the universities, and also your staff. You've met me, I've got dementia. You've met one person with dementia. That's not, that doesn't really prepare you for other people, because we're all different. Although there are some commonalities, and that doesn't mean that it's not difficult to prepare yourself. But I think early on, by chatting to an individual, you can make an assessment about how much they will retain, how much knowledge they will retain, what sort of confidence they've got, etc. And you can put them at ease. And I think that's particularly important. And it does seem like, oh gosh, I haven't got time for all of that, but I think that's actually saving time, which is what I always say for carers, because you're going to have less problems I think, with the individual, and that will save a considerable amount of time in doing the work. It certainly worked when I got rushed into hospital by the paramedics, and that was Andy's story from 2 years ago. I had a brain hemorrhage, and I was not a very easy patient for the paramedics to handle, but they knew how to calm me down and how to get me into an ambulance, because I was refusing to sort of go anywhere and not recognizing what was going on. I think that was, encouraging to not to work harder. They can't work any harder than they do. I think it's just enabling them, perhaps, I hope, to what I can do is help your team to work smarter.
Thank you.
That's really good. I'm going to let this run for 10 minutes if people can bear with us, if you're happy to stay there, Andy, because
Yes, no
I've got a
problem.
number of questions. I think it'd be a great pity to lose it. I'm going to cheat a bit by asking Lee Brooks to come in, because you put your question down, Lee, and I think it relates to what we've just been discussing.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Andy. It's really nice to meet you. It's been really interesting listening to you. My question is, I was actually wondering how your husband has coped, and if you've any tips for us in terms of what we should now consider for our staff who are also carers, particularly as we now enter this new normality.
Yeah, he's coped. He says, well, he's not found it as stressful as perhaps others have. Like my son, who's much younger in years, and I think that's probably made a difference. But as I say, the thing that is stressing more than anything else is the course that he went on, which was understanding dementia. And I think the more that the carers understand about this terrible disease, the better it is. One of the initiatives that I actually volunteered for, I sit on the board of Books on Prescription, which some of you may have seen. It's a new initiative. If you go into Lloyd's Pharmacy now, or any GP surgery, you should see the Books on Prescription literature, and it deals with mental health. So far, we started with dementia, now we're dealing with mental health, and there are 25 titles in there, and they're designed really because GPs, etc., don't necessarily have enough time to sit with carers and explain the situation. And I think probably a lot of GPs don't know much about the care side of dementia anyway. They know the clinical aspects of it. There are some really good titles, easy to read titles in there that help. I had mixed feelings about it, because it was a bit like, you've had your diagnosis, now go away and read a book. You know, it's handled a bit more sympathetically than that, and I have to say the titles in there are very good. So I'd say that my husband's dealt with it extremely well, simply because of the experience that he's had up to date, and the knowledge that he's wanted to gain, if you like, to try and understand this disease, because his family, prior to me having it, he's had no experience of it in his family. Unfortunately, my family, my father suffered with it. My father's mother and two of my father's sisters had dementia. It's not what eventually killed my father. My father died of lung cancer, but he was certainly on the journey with dementia.
Thank you.
But, no, he's coped very well, thank you.
Going to try and squeeze a few more questions, and I don't know if we're going to get them all. Claire Roach, I think you were next.
Yes.
Go back up the list.
Thank Thank you, Martin. Mine is really a comment, but thank you, Andy, again for sharing your time with us today, because your insights are just so invaluable, I think, to us as a service, and you have been a huge friend to us as a service in helping us with our work on dementia, and I thank you for that. I think really what you've highlighted today is that what carers experience and how we need to make sure that we really have a focus on carers. And of course it was Carers Week a couple of weeks ago, and we as a service put out some messages on social media to highlight that carers need to think about having an emergency care plan in place for them, so that they do absolutely, if they are taken unwell, they have a plan in place that makes sure that whoever they care for has got a really good plan that will support that carer. And we know that that's really important, because often if people are taken unwell unexpectedly and they are a carer, they will worry greatly about the person that they care for. So that was a really important message, Chairman, that we put out a couple of weeks ago. So just really wanted to reinforce that message. And Andy, I'd be interested in your views on the importance of carers having an emergency care plan in place.
I think it's extremely important. It's not something, I have to be honest, that I'd really thought about until the COVID pandemic. The local authority, and I can't speak highly enough of them, they actually rang up to find out, well, if your carer gets COVID, gets rushed into hospital with COVID-19, do you have a standby carer? And encouraging me to give them those details and to phone them if I needed to. They've given me an emergency contact number. So I do think it is really important. And I'd just like to say, really, I can't thank carers enough for what they do for us, whether that's in care homes or whether it's in the home setting. I think they are undervalued, and you realise when you're asked questions like the one you've just asked about how do you manage without them, and you start thinking about it, that you realise exactly how important their role is. Yeah.
Strong message there. I think you're both in absolute agreement. I'm gonna move us on to, I think, Bethan, you had a question or a comment.
Thank you, Chair. Andy, good morning. We've not met before, we've not spoken, but I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you this morning.
Thank you.
I don't have a question as such, I have some comments to make, and the first thing is to echo what others have said. Thank you very much for joining us and for talking us through your journey and your experiences. The level of insight and honesty in which you describe the way that you live with dementia, I think is compelling, and I have no doubt for lots of people out there, be they carers of people with dementia or other people living with dementia, they will gain an awful lot listening to you. You focus very much on what you can do rather than what you can't do now, which for me is the well, it comes across very strongly, and that's key really to help someone live effectively with dementia, as you obviously know. Thank you also for all the training you do for our staff. We will benefit from the insight that you have. And you talked right at the start, you referred to the fact that you're an ambassador with Alzheimer's Cymru, and I think, you know, you come across as an exceptional ambassador, not just for Alzheimer's Cymru, but for anyone living with dementia or anyone within the lives of someone living with dementia. So thank you very much.
I've got a challenging new role, which I was asked to do next week. They've got a consultant, a dementia consultant now in Wales, just been appointed. So I'm actually going to join her team as a dementia voice, if you like, really just for establishing the team. I always tell them I'll do it for as long as I can, because I don't know how long I can be useful. I see changes in what I'm able to do, but I want to do things for as long as I can. I came into this originally doing what I do basically because I wanted to remove the stigma associated with mental illness and with dementia. That's changed. Although that's still something which is relatively important, I now do it because I want people to understand what it's like to live with dementia, and I want people with dementia to understand that you can still live well with dementia.
That's really brilliant. I'm conscious of time. I always have the sour job of pulling people back to time. So Emrys, I'll bring you in. I may have missed somebody, so if I have, Emrys.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Andy. Very powerful story, but it's also good to see you've still got the confidence to come and share it with us. So I think that's much appreciated. You made, in my opinion, quite light of the shielding letter, because those that haven't got one of these things, as I and a few others do, they will know that this shielding within the household means that if you've got a partner, you should be living totally separate lives.
Yeah,
which
I know.
just adds to the pressure. You know, you're not supposed to eat together, sleep together, and not supposed to, you know, eat, prepare food together, use separate bathrooms if you can. It's quite powerful. The second thing you said, and I was quite pleased to hear it, that you've got good support from the local authority, because as you know, we live in Cardiff and the Vale Health Board area, but we get our services, medical in the main, from Cwmtaf Morgannwg now. And any cross referrals between that health board and the Cardiff and Vale local authority don't usually go that smoothly at all.
No.
So that's a challenge. And coming back to the confidence level, as I say, it's good to see that with all that you've gone through, that you've got the confidence to speak to people. But there's two sides to this, I see. There's the mental sort of confidence and the mental strength, but there's also the clinical risk side. You know, when you get out and about, you said you've been to Tesco but haven't gone in. I've done the same thing, because I am really concerned about getting ill. So it's very good to see that you're dealing with these things and highlighting them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emrys. I'm going to leave the last words to you, Andy, by way of response to that, and anything you wanted just to say by way of conclusion. Then sadly, we will have to move on.
Just really to comment that Emrys is correct. I mean, the real issue with shielding is you stay in a room on your own, and your food is left at the door. And I mean, essentially, it's not house arrest, it's room arrest. We've all been under house arrest. Someone with dementia, you have to be flexible. It just won't work. It's impossible. I'm shielding not because of dementia. I've got LGL leukemia. I'm in remission. However, they decided that I still needed to be shielding. But we've looked at the recommendations, and we basically, what we're doing, I guess, as a household, is taking extra measures. It's not like the whole household is shielding, but you know, the amount of cleaning that gets done here and the amount of hand sanitizing. I mean, we got a household with red hands. We just go OTT with things like that. But if I'd had to do what other people have done when they are shielding alone in a room with dementia, I think my mental health would be something that would have been it would have needed, I think, perhaps, well, do I use the expression? They probably would have had to section me. Yeah,
that's a salutary point.
Let me
You mentioned at the beginning that you're not a brave man. I think you are an extremely brave person to talk with to come in front of us and to talk it with such honesty. So really appreciate it, and also for the ongoing work you're doing with us, which is great for us, and I hope helpful to you as well. So
it is, and I'm always grateful for the opportunities to help others and tell my story. As I say, I've done this all my life, really, in terms of speaking, attending board meetings, lecturing in universities. I have the skill, and I go out there, and I don't speak for me. I speak for others, or all of the people. If I try to speak for everyone that's got dementia, that really. Not because of a lack of confidence, it's just that they're shy, you know, and that's like the rest of us. Some of us are, and some of us aren't. So I go out there to talk for those that can't do it, and hopefully I can tell the story that you know they appreciate and feel is relevant to them.
Absolutely, I think you're doing a great job of doing that, and there's real food for thought there for us. Both in terms of people that we serve who are suffering with dementia or similar conditions, but also the issue of support to carers. And I'm pleased to see in the margin comments from Claire Vaughan that the whole issue of being a carer-friendly organisation, bearing in mind we employ over 3,000 people, is of huge and growing significance as we move forward. So there's a lot in this. What I was going to say was, by way of drawing to a close, that we've got a chat function here which will pick up a lot of the comments. What's been covered is been audio recorded, so I want to ensure that the minutes, or at least an attachment to the minutes, cover this discussion, because there's so many important points in here that I think we need to take forward outside the room. So I look to Keith Cox, our board secretary, and his team to pick up all the messages that you've so kindly highlighted to us and that we've drawn out in the discussion.
Yeah. Well, if there are any key questions that we haven't had time to answer, I would do my best to answer them by email. Can I just conclude by saying I can't speak highly enough of the Wales Ambulance Trust and the Blue Light Strategy. I had a bit of a conflict of interest. For Social Care Wales, I've been an accolade judge. So I've had to go around looking at all of the work that people are doing with dementia across Wales, and I think what you're doing is wonderful, and the fact that you've devoted the resources to it is something which I think is extremely important. And I get, no, it's your job, but if there are other areas of mental health where you think we can do the same, then do it.
Thank you. You're not going to have to draw things to a close. You're very welcome to stay with us if, as you so wish. But if, as I would understand it, you've got other things you want to get on with during the day, and just to reinforce my thanks, and lovely to see you again, and to hear from you.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, well, that's such a hard act to follow, really. So no pressure on you, Chris, with the annual accounts and the accountability report. I am conscious of time quite clearly, so I'll pass over to you, Chris, to take us through. I think you've got a presentation, haven't you?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have got a few slides. As you say, how do I follow that? Certainly not easy to do, even with a set of annual accounts. But what I was hoping to perhaps do, Chairman, if it's okay with you, we always have a little bit of a conversation, I suppose, about how we sort of sequence the way in which we take board through what's required today, where we're ultimately asking board today to approve the annual accounts and the accountability report, which will allow a few of us as officers and board members to sign those accounts and submit them into Welsh Government by the revised deadline this financial year,
of the 30th of June. So what I'm going to suggest, Chair, if it's okay, is I'm going to attempt to share my screen in a minute. So there's a risk that that could go wrong, but to try and provide a few slides similar to what I did when I presented the accounts to Audit Committee last week. So this will focus specifically on the annual accounts bit of the detailed attachment, the long detailed attachment you have to the SBAR that's been provided to support this agenda item, which is the accountability report, which includes a number of other reports, but also the annual accounts at the very end. So I'll take a board through a brief overview of the accounts. Possibly then, just taking maybe the sequence in slightly out of order with the agenda, it might be an idea then to invite Anthony Veal from Audit Wales to provide his update in terms of his opinion specifically on those accounts and the opinion that following the audit, hopefully he will confirm today that they are placing on those accounts, and then maybe go back to anything else then which Keith can pick up and present perhaps in a little bit more detail within the rest of the accountability report, if that's okay, Chair. So I'm,
I'm on mute. Yeah, Chris, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's great.
Is that okay? Thank you. I'm being told that the host has disabled me from participating in screen sharing. So I thought I checked it earlier and it was okay. So Rachel, I'm not sure if you can allow that for me, please. Thank you.
Bear with me. It should be allowed now.
I think it is. Okay, so hopefully you can all see a front page of a PowerPoint presentation. Yep. So, right, okay. So what I'm going to do, as I say, for 5-10 minutes or so, hopefully, is share a quick overview of where we've got to and how we are where we are today. Some initial key points for board members to note when reviewing those accounts, and some of the main headlines within those accounts, and then drilling down just briefly into some of the key figures within the accounts and some of the comparators to previous years. And I always sort of focus when we do that in a set of accounts which has got a lot of detail clearly in terms of detailed notes and disclosures that support a set of accounts. But there's 5 or 6 sort of key sort of pillars of those accounts, if you like. Clearly in any particular year, it's the income the organisation received, how it spent that income, and then on the balance sheet, what's its asset base looking like? What's its current working capital looking like in terms of debtors and creditors? And then briefly on to next steps after hopefully approval today. So general overview, we've had revised deadlines clearly this year. We would normally have done this a month ago. So we have had revised deadlines due to COVID-19. The whole process this year has slipped by about approximately a month. So our draft accounts were submitted to Audit Wales and Welsh Government on the 21st of May. The revised deadline was the 22nd. We submitted a day early, within which all our statutory financial duties within a draft set of accounts were reported as being met. Clearly, there's been a detailed audit undertaken since then by Audit Wales, and I won't steal Anthony's thunder in terms of presenting on the outcome of that. The retained surplus, the key sort of one figure within the accounts, if you like, from a revenue perspective, the retained surplus for the financial year is 45,000, so effectively a break-even position. These were presented to Audit Committee, as I say, last week, and one key point from Audit Committee excuse me, to present as part of this to board today is that there's been no changes to that set of accounts since then. Audit Committee recommended today that the board would approve that set of accounts, but obviously only on the basis of there being no material changes to that set of accounts between then and now. There's actually been no changes whatsoever to the set of accounts. The version you've seen is exactly what went to Audit Committee last week. So just to summarise then, as I say, the statutory duties, the Trust's overall summary outturn performance against financial targets can be summarised in that table there, where essentially we've delivered against everything that we are required to do so through delivery of particularly a balanced financial position from a revenue perspective, where our expenditure has been contained within the levels of income that we receive. And I'll go through that in a little bit more detail now. A couple of areas just to note. There's a couple of notes that's probably just worth highlighting to board. In note 37.1, buried sort of within the accounts detail, there's a note around the treatment of additional 6.3 employers' pension costs that we've been fully funded for by government, as is the rest of the NHS in Wales. But the costs as part of the accounts process through the year, the actual cash payment for that was made by Welsh Government on behalf of all of the NHS in Wales, but to make sure that the costs are in the right organisation's books at the end of the year, this income and expenditure adjustment has been treated through the accounts to include that increase in pension, employers' pension contribution that kicked in from the 1st of April 2019. And there's a highlighted in something, Anthony, which we'll present as part of what's known as the ISA 260 document, which is the main instrument through which Audit Wales will provide their opinion on the accounts. Is an additional, it will highlight that we've been required by government to include an additional narrative, what's known as a contingent liability, which is about a potential future cost, which we can't quantify at this stage. And this one is in particular to do with the announcement just before Christmas of the NHS being prepared to make good, if you like, personal pension contribution losses to senior clinicians should they trip over certain thresholds and have penalties personally as a result of doing extra work for the NHS. So note 24 of the accounts highlights this. I think it's important, though, for board to realise, as I say, that this is a note that's being requested across all of the UK, actually, or certainly England and Wales. Every NHS organisation is being asked to include that contingent liability note based on that initially UK government and supported by Welsh Government's status in relation to this. But primarily, it's focused, you know, at the time, the need for that sort of bit of cover to be put into the system was focusing primarily on, you know, more senior hospital sort of medical staff and consultants. It's highly unlikely that the impact on us will be great, if at all. I would imagine it'd be probably no impact for the organisation. But as I say, we've been asked, because the scope of the requirement does include a range of clinicians. We've been asked to include, consistent with everybody else, the same note and additional contingent liability, which is just a narrative in the accounts. There's no figures in it, as I say, because it's unquantifiable at this stage, but it does just flag that at some point in the future there could be a liability in result of this. And finally, obviously, COVID-19 started to clearly impact on our costs as well as everything else as we got towards the end of the financial year. Lesser extent in terms of 2019-20, started through March, but we have got some costs which we've highlighted within the accounts. We did not receive any additional income to cover those revenue costs in 2019-20 because of the financial position we were in, and given how sort of minor in some ways in the scheme of things those costs were through March, we didn't necessarily need the additional income cover to support them. Clearly a very different position as we've come into 2021 and the costs we're incurring since. But again, there's an additional note that's been placed on the accounts that's highlighted what those costs were, both from a revenue and capital perspective. And it's also had a marginal impact on our stock levels as we got towards the end of the year. Our stock levels are up a little bit higher because we did start to sort of receive some more PPE and other types of stock that we were looking to increase resilience within. As I say, the main headlines in the accounts is a retained surplus of 45,000, so effectively a break-even position. So that's made up of income of circa 212 million. That's our sort of turnover now. We receive from a variety of sources just over 212 million. And surprisingly, given we've broken even, we've made net expenditure of the same value. The other statutory requirements, as I mentioned earlier, we've delivered on our public sector payment policy requirement. That's the need to make payments to 95% and above of non-NHS invoices within 30 days, and we've delivered that. We've also delivered our capital expenditure in note 13 within our Welsh Government set capital expenditure limit. And for this year, there's as a result of the pandemic, there is another statutory target that we usually have to meet, which is called the external finance limit, which is almost a product of all of that in terms of cash balances at the end of the year. But because of the suspension of some of the deposit accounts available to NHS trusts as a result of the pandemic emerging, particularly through March, that requirement was formally, it's a narrative requirement as much as anything, but it was formally removed from 1920. So income of that 212 million, the vast majority, as you would expect, comes through to us. 200 million of it in what's known in the accounts in note 3 as patient care activities, a lot of which we get from clearly our main contract for EMS services from our commissioner in terms of EASC. We've got income then from local health boards, the NEPS funding that we get, even though it's commissioned by the commissioner and through EASC now, the funding for that actually still flows through directly from local health boards into us, and also the 111 funding that we get it still flows through into us from an Iron Bevan Health Board, who act as the banker for the 111 service for Welsh Government, if you like. So we get money still flowing through to us from local health boards. We have a little bit of income direct from Welsh Government. As I say, the majority of that is that 6.3% increase in pension contribution that was funded through to us directly at the year end, and a couple of other minor amounts from elsewhere. So that increase, that 200 million represents an increase in 20 million from the previous financial year. And that 20 million increase is made up of what's been listed there. We have for a number of years now had a general uplift in our income of about 2%, plus some additional funding to support a pay deal. So that's about 4 million. Other funding for other developments that we've agreed via our commissioners, continuation of the Band 6 paramedic business case, clinical support desks, funding for advanced practitioners, about 4 million in year. We had a Healthier Wales top up to the 2% in 2019-20, as board members may recall. That equated to about £1 million at year end. We have continuing funding come through for the 111 service as it continues to be expanded and rolled out into other health board areas and across Wales, and the full year effect of previous year's expansions. That's about 2 million. And we're transferring work from health boards, as board will know, for the NEP service. So that comes with the funding to support that and the costs to hit that. And as I mentioned, the additional employers' pension costs flowing through from government, which equates to about 6 million at year end. On top of that, there's a smaller amount then as known as sort of other operating income. That's increased by about 4 million. So in total, it's about 11 million. Some technical items within this, mainly it's of costs about, the increase in cost is about coverage of the personal injury benefit scheme that is managed across NHS Wales, including a change in the discount rate of future liabilities for that, which has resulted in increasing costs, which we get funded direct from government for, and some technical funding around particularly sort of depreciation increases has been captured through there. On top of that, there's a small amount of investment income and other gains, getting less actually in terms of the ability for us to get interest payments, if you like, in terms of interest rates. But when we do have cash balances, we do invest them in a minor way and get some income through that. So total income overall has increased by 24 million. And no surprise, as we broke even as an organisation last financial year, we broke even as a organisation this financial year. Not only is the expenditure matching that, the increase in expenditure matches that as well. So our costs have increased by 24 million as well. But it's important to note that's a net cost increase after the requirement, as board members will know, to make savings to deliver within that funding available. So if we hadn't made the savings, clearly we wouldn't have been able to deliver our costs within the funding that's been made available to us through those variety of sources I've presented. Our net spend of 212 million is predominantly made up of pay costs, 149 million, and 63 million of other costs. And you see a bit of duplication here now, obviously, because the main differences from the previous year is that our costs have moved to match a lot of the income adjustments that have come through previously. So the main differences for increasing from the previous year is the employer pension costs, the pay award, other developments, the increase in the 111 service, the NEPS transfer work, etc. So you'll see some duplication there clearly as the costs have increased in line with the income funded. So there's a chart there that just shows a bit of a breakdown. This is similar to what we present when we present the annual report with the accounts in it at the annual general meeting mostly. But it's just a quick analysis of that net revenue expenditure, and not surprisingly, as we know, there's significantly material element of our costs, the staffing costs, 70%. On top of that, there's about just under 20% then of pure non-pay costs, if you like, and then that's fuel, predominantly vehicle repairs and other parts of non-pay. Then we have a couple of technical items in terms of what the sort of non-cash costs. That's our capital charges, depreciation, return on our asset base, And then we do buy a small amount of services from elsewhere, in particular, an increasing number slightly of, still small in the scheme of things, but 2% of our costs are about purchasing healthcare from non-NHS bodies. And as I say, that is increasing slightly, directly linked to the transfer of work of net services from health boards, which we provide in a number of ways, but some of which is through other providers. Quickly, in terms of the balance sheet, just to sort of note more than anything, but the other sort of key return within the accounts, as well as the sort of I&E account, if you like, is the balance sheet. Tangible fixed assets is an important note because it demonstrates the delivery of our capital expenditure limit. Excuse me. So, and where that it kind of gets hidden, that delivery of the capital expenditure limit in the actual accounts, if you're not sure where to look for it. So I pulled this out just to sort of highlight that, and it's that capital purchases in year figure of 25 million. And if you look in that note, you'll see that our net book value at the beginning of the year in terms of our tangible fixed assets was just under 80 million. We made purchases in year of 25 million. We then have depreciation charges and impairments, reducing that balance in year of 16 million. So we end up at the end of the year with a carried forward tangible fixed asset balance of 88 million. But it was just important to sort of highlight where that capital expenditure limit actually sits in the body of the accounts. And a couple of the working capital balances, debtors, we've had an increase in debtors year on year of about 2 million, but that's mainly due to Welsh risk pool provisions, which we have income and expenditure or through debtors and creditors for. And our creditors and accrual have increased by in the region of 4 million, which partly is a result of that increase in debtors, but also a few smaller items around further accruals. The East provider contract actually in the year end, as we balanced it off, was slightly overpaid, so that one needed to be repaid. And also due to the change in accounting treatment around the EFL at the end of the year, there was a repayment of public dividend capital, as is known, owed to Welsh Government, a technical adjustment through the balance sheet that we needed to record in the accounts as well. So I appreciate that's been a quick, sort of whistle-stop tour through what is a very detailed 70+ pages set of accounts, accounting treatment, notes to the accounts, and a lot of disclosures. But hopefully I've given you a flavour of what the accounts look like, and the key sort of headline figures within it, how it's moved in particular from the previous financial year, and the key headlines within that movement. So from today, the plan hopefully would be clearly a review today and questions now. As I say, probably then maybe the opportune time to ask Audit Wales for their opinion on the accounts following their detailed audit work. Hopefully all of that then will allow for board for approval for those set of accounts for today, following which we will sign off. And again, things been a little bit different this year. We have got agreement that in the short term, at least anyway, rather than normally do the sort of wet signatures that predominantly myself, Jason as Chief Executive and Martin as Chair would need to place on those set of accounts, we have got agreement this year to put an electronic signature through to them, including what's known as a letter of representation, which we need to provide to Audit Wales to present the accounts to them and to agree with them some of the background details and assumptions within the accounts. Following all that, we have to submit now to Welsh Government, as I say, by a revised deadline of next week, 1 month later than normal, and then they go through a consolidated and final check process for which they're then approved and signed off by the Auditor General somewhere around the 2nd of July, I think, for this year. So that's me done. So I'm going to attempt to stop sharing my screen. I think I've done that. So I think, Martin, if that's okay, I will open it up for questions now. But that was just, as I say, a brief summary of the detail within the accounts and the culmination of 12 months of financial transactions and a number of months of detailed work by my team, and thanks from me to my team for the work that's gone into these, but also over the last month or so to the work that's been done jointly between my team and Anthony's team in terms of Audit Wales.
Thank you, Chris, and I wanted to echo my thanks to you and your team for the obviously huge amount of work that's gone into this. And a successful outturn, without doubt. Break even on those vast sums is a commendable achievement, given the challenges that we consistently face. So we can throw this open to questions. I'm of course mindful of time. I thought it was a really good presentation, by the way, Chris. Covered all the key points. Obviously, this has been through audit committee, but perhaps if there are questions, and then we can ask Anthony for his view. I think that was your suggestion, Chris, wasn't it? But first of all, Paul, I think you had a question, didn't you?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Really good presentation, Chris. I think one thing that has changed since audit committee is that we've drawn out the issue about the savings that we've had to make. And it's just testament to all the staff's hard work in terms of achieving that break even by saving 2.1 million. It was a bit hidden when we talked about it at audit committee, but I'm glad to see that you brought it out today. So thank you to all the staff who have enabled us to break even on that basis.
A very good point. Thank you, Paul. Are there any other comments? Martin, from an audit committee perspective, are you happy with the world?
Yeah, let me just, I was about to say the same thing that Paul just said, actually. It is a good result, and, you know, it might sound not a lot, you know, 1% saving of 2 million in a year, but it's relentless. There's a saving expected every year. So it's not as if it's the first one, it's year on year. So it is a commendable achievement by the managers within the organisation, and of course getting the the accounts through external audit, internal audit within the time scales, pretty important as well. So yeah, credit to everybody that's been involved in this.
Okay, no, that's good. That's good to hear. We've been through process, and you're comfortable from an audit committee,
finance committee
perspective. I apologise.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Pam, I don't know whether you had any thoughts from the audit committee perspective. I'm confusing my chairs here, aren't I?
That's okay, Martin.
I'll get over it.
I wasn't sure whether to come in after Anthony because the main issue from audit committee was that we weren't actually seeing an absolute finished product. There was one matter still under investigation, which was around assets under construction. But I can reassure the board that in between the audit committee and now, that has now been resolved and no longer appears as a significant matter in the Audit Wales report. So I just wanted to reassure the board that although at audit committee we didn't have the final position, we were almost there, and we've had that confirmed via email from Anthony at Audit Wales since. So we are in a position to recommend approval.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that. I think it's probably timely to ask Anthony, who I hope is on the video meeting, for your comment, to welcome you and to ask you for any comments you may have.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, good.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'll just cover the key issues. So on the agenda, this is our audit of accounts report. Just as a reminder, the draft report went to the Trust Audit Committee last week. The chair of the audit committee already alluded to this, Chair, where we presented the report. There were a number of audit areas outstanding. I can now confirm that these have now been completed, and we can confirm we intend to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, and the actual proposed opinion that we're prepared to provide on the accounts is in Appendix 2 of that report. During the audit, Chair, there were a number of adjustments that have been made. These have been reported in Appendix 3 of our report, but I can confirm they had no bottom line impact on the Trust's financial performance. There was one significant issue that we've included in the report. I thought Chris covered this off lovely in terms of his presentation, but I'll just reconfirm a couple of matters. It is, of course, in relation to the generic issue in respect of the clinician's pension tax liability. It is indeed an All Wales issue as a result of a ministerial direction that came through in December 2019. I think, as Chris mentioned, we don't think it's in any way going to have a big impact on the Welsh Ambulance Services Trust, but ultimately we've nevertheless asked that a contingent liability note be put into the accounts, and that has been included in note 24. And we've included an emphasis of matter paragraph just explaining and referring to that note within our audit report, but I would say that has had no impact on our opinion. Our opinion is unqualified, i.e. no material concerns on the financial statements. Just to pick up what you, a couple of comments from yourself and Chris, I would like to pass on my thanks to the trust staff for not only preparing the accounts under these circumstances, but supporting the audit process remotely as well. Quite an achievement. So I would like to record my my thanks to the trust and the finance officers. So that's it, Chair. More than happy to take any comments.
Thank you, Anthony. That's really helpful, and I'm grateful to you and your team for turning things around as well. These are always pressurised times, aren't they? Very tight, the tighter deadlines every year, in fact. Any comments on what Anthony said? Don't feel that you have to make comments. I think this is a sign of a very successful outcome. A little bit of self-congratulation is in order, I believe, here. Okay. Chris, we put the recommendation for adoption of the accounts is also a recommendation to adopt the accountability report. So should we move on to that side of the equation before wrapping up the overall recommendation? So
if we could do, Chair, thank you. So I'm probably going to hand over to Keith if that's okay for this bit, Chair.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay, thank you both. I too will attempt to share a screen and hope that's successful. Just trying to keep up with Mr. Turley, who's done such a good job with his presentation. So thank you, Chris. So the accountability report, it's not one that naturally stands out, but it is part of the suite of documents that we prepare each year. It's an important part. It's by no means as detailed as the accounts can be, but nonetheless, a lot of work goes into this, and we start work on this sometimes at the end of February, beginning of March. So I'll say right at the outset, a big thanks to the team and staff across the organisation who spend a lot of time and work on this. In particular, Mike Armstrong, who's really coordinated all the work. The accountability report is subject to Audit Wales scrutiny and Welsh Government scrutiny in exactly the same way as the accounts are. So each of those look at the drafts and provide comments to us. It has to be signed off by the accounting officer, so it's very important that it's accurate and reflects a true view. The accountability report consists of three main parts. It's the corporate governance report, and that's about the trust's governance structures and how they've been operating and working during the year. The second part is the remuneration and staff report. That contains details of staff's salaries and other information on staffing within the trust. So again, a valuable report. The final part is the National Assembly for Wales Accountability and Audit Report. That deals with any regularity issues, fees and charges, and when ready, we'll hold the audit certificate and audit report. So again, very important documents. Trying to get onto the second slide. Probably the key document in all of that suite of documents is the annual governance statement, which sits in the corporate governance part. That corporate governance, the annual governance statement carries a lot of information, detailed information about how the governance arrangements work in the organisation and the type of activities and things that the trust have been dealing with during the year. For instance, it will go into detail on what the committees had considered and the work that they've been carried out. Also, it will talk about risk and how we manage risk. So there's a lot of detailed information in there. For the first time this year, we've been asked by Welsh Government to include COVID-19 type issues and how that's affected us and how that's impacted on our governance arrangements. I think we did a report to the board last month where we were able to say that a lot of the governance structures have stayed in place and very little had to change. We hadn't changed delegated authorities or anything else, but there were a few things that we didn't do that we would wanted to. And for instance, we wanted to do a board survey and a self-assessment where we would have got views from board members, those that attend board meetings, stakeholders, and that's been put on hold, but we certainly hope to pick that up as we go through. And another of the key documents, as I said right at the beginning, is the remuneration of the staff report that talks about and shows senior managers' salaries, any additional payments that have been made to the senior staff, and also carries information on staff such as numbers and sickness rates and a number of other facts. So again, that's an important document and one that I know would be of interest to a lot of people. All in all, I can say, as I said at the beginning, Audit Wales and Welsh Government view the draft, they make comments and they feed that back to us. I'm able to confirm everything that Audit Wales have commented on. We've accepted and amended the reports accordingly. Welsh Government, similarly, we did by far the majority of the comments they made. There was a couple we didn't accept. They were only minor points, but we've discussed that with Welsh Government and they were very happy to accept our position. So all in all, it's been a good report. Very few comments made, and we put this forward to the board for approval.
Okay, thank you, Keith. If you wouldn't mind coming out of the presentation, we'll get our screen back. That's really helpful. I'll just go to Anthony again quickly on this, because you'll have looked at this, as Keith has said, just to confirm that you're comfortable with the outcome. Perhaps also take a view from Pam as well, as this has been to Audit Committee, of course, hasn't it?
Yeah, we can confirm it's in accord that the various documents have been prepared in accordance with the relevant guidance, Chair, and also that what's in there is consistent with our knowledge in terms of the Ambulance Trust, and that will be referred to again in our audit report as well, just to give you some further assurance.
That's great, thank you. And from your perspective, Pam, as Chair of Audit, I've got my chairs right this time.
It's okay. Yes, we did discuss this one, Martin, and requested a couple of amendments, and I've noticed that they've been made. So yes, we're happy with the documents.
Excellent. Tribute to Mike in particular, but other members of the team, Keith, of course, a monumental amount of work to put this together, not to be underestimated, and to retain that sort of up-to-date feel to it is at times quite difficult. So I applaud all the efforts that have been made. Are we happy to move on to the overarching recommendation, unless there are any other comments? I think that's been a very successful body of work, which I hope for our public viewers gives assurance around the fact of the transparency of our business, both financially and otherwise, and the robustness of our governance arrangements. And those documents provide you with a lot of detail to back up that assurance. So Chris, should we go to the recommendation in the report, do you think? I should incidentally, I guess, have specifically mentioned Jill, who played a particular part in your team, Chris, in putting
Absolutely,
the accounts together.
Yes.
Yeah, she should get a lot of credit for this work.
Yeah, Jill would normally have probably joined us, or certainly when we're in a physical board, she would join us for the account session. Not least just to make sure we all sign it in the right place, Martin, because I know she's very sort of paranoid about that, making sure we don't put the signatures in the wrong place. But actually, that's slightly easier this year with an electronic signature. I think we only have to do it once, and it's much easier to get in the right place. So she's more comfortable with us leaving us alone, I think, to sign them off ourselves this year. But yes. Thanks for that reminder. I think that's good to sort of flag that Jill, in my team in particular, has done a lot of the work on that. But yes, so sorry, Chair, if we could move to the recommendations, that would be good. Thank you.
Brilliant. So it's recommended that we approve the annual accounts and accountability report for 1920, the documents, and therefore sanction the signature of those reports, in this case electronically, and then formally submitted, I guess, on the back of that. Is that acceptable to all parties?
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. Good. That's really good. Good to get to that point with a year that at times is very tough to see us come through with our finances in particular. So well done. Conscious of time, we're a bit behind schedule. What I suggest we do though is that we should stick to our guns and have a short Q&A session, which Estelle, I'm looking to you probably to coordinate to pick up questions that members of the public or staff have posed ahead of the meeting. And I think you're hoping to pick up a few that we've seen come through on Facebook during the meeting, which is going further than actually we planned. But if we take 20 minutes as allowed for this session, and then break at that point, we'll be running slightly late, but I think we should do that now, because it's an important part of our business.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to everybody who's joining us remotely, as it were. It's quite disconcerting for us as a board because you can see us, but we can't see you, but we know that you're there. And thank you very much for sharing your questions in advance, which came in to the communications team, and also to those of you who've posted some queries and comments in the Facebook chat. I can't guarantee we'll get to all of those, and for colleagues from WAST who have posted some comments in there, don't forget that you've got an opportunity through our WAST Live sessions, the next one of which is in a fortnight, to be able to pose any question that you would like to pose of the executive team. So without further ado, Martin, there was a bit of a theme in the questions that came in prior to the meeting, and they were very much, as you alluded to at the start of the meeting, around how we've been supporting and using our volunteer body during the pandemic. So we've had a couple of questions in. We've had a couple in from our CFR representative from the South Eastern Iron Bevan CFR schemes, Peter Richards, and also from another colleague, Stuart Johnston. I know both of them are with us remotely. So guys, I just wanted to let you know, I'll try and condense what you've asked, because you've both asked similar things. And they're really along two lines. One is, how have we used our WAST CFRs during the pandemic, and the decisions that we've made, why have we made them? Talking a little bit about our volunteer strategy and where have we got to with that. How we line manage our CFRs and how that's going to be shaping up. A little bit about how we, an age restriction with CFRs. So in terms of beyond CFR 70th birthday, do we have a restriction around training and official activity after our CFRs hit 70? And then how are we going to optimise using our CFRs moving forward? So CFRs, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, is our community first responders. We have very many of them across Wales, volunteers entirely, who support us massively with our responses to our communities that we serve. So on the CFR matters, and before we pick up some of the issues in the Facebook feed, I wanted to hand over to my colleague Lee Brooks, who's Director of Operations and has overall responsibility for community first responders, just to touch on some of those issues that have been raised and to address some of them. Just for those who've posed the questions, Stuart and Peter, Lee has had sight of the questions, so he knows exactly what you've asked, rather than my rather brief condensing of the subject. So Lee, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, Estelle. Actually, you summarised that very well from the questions I had seen. So, Chair, if I may, I've just got, I do have a little bit of explanation, so I might just take a couple of minutes if that's okay. So, firstly, what I'd like to start by saying is that we haven't taken any decisions regarding our response to COVID-19 lightly, and of course, central to those decisions is the health and safety of our people, which includes our volunteers. And by volunteers, that extends beyond our community first responders, because also into our volunteer car drivers as well. I do understand that some of our volunteers have a sense of frustration because there have been changes to the way that we dispatch our community first responders particularly. However, the changes that have been made have been done to protect our volunteers from the risks of the virus. Of most significance was to stand down any volunteer who met the vulnerable category. And that's what the element that alludes to the 70-year-old plus. So that's a temporary position that we've made in the organisation, that because someone 70 plus meets the definition of the vulnerable category, clearly it's not appropriate for us to be sending them to patients. I do look forward to lifting that as soon as the Welsh position should change. So we do watch that closely so that we can resume our pre-pandemic position. We assess that the dispatch of community first responders, and also not forgetting our uniformed first responders to red incidents, was inherently a risk given the high potential for exposure to aerosol generating procedures. We did undertake a detailed risk assessment, which did include consultation with our infection prevention and control colleagues and clinicians. So we did take some action to stop red incident dispatch, as well as the automatic dispatch arrangements within the CAD system. So it's alongside that, we also took the decision that we wouldn't knowingly dispatch a community first responder to a suspected COVID incident. However, that being said, we didn't cease the use of community first responders in entirety. I am pleased that, given the decisions that were made, that nationally our red performance has been what it has been. So that's that has remained a very encouraging and good position for the trust and for our patients nationally. At the point where we organisationally determined that all staff were to move into the wearing of level 2 PPE to every incident, we included access to that PPE for our volunteers and sought to ensure that the training requirements for that were met. I'm sure that the board will recognise the risks associated with the donning and doffing process in itself. So we did need to satisfy ourselves, our community first responders particularly, would be safe in undertaking that process. We have provided specific guidance to protect the safety of our community first responders within the materials that we have released to our staff. Throughout the pandemic period, and recognising that the community first responders haven't been as highly utilised as perhaps they were pre-pandemic, we have opened up some other opportunities, particularly as we recognise how keen our community first responders are to help the organisation, particularly at this time. And that's included some consolidated training to help in the NEPS, non-emergency patient transport service, with access to some short-term bank arrangements. That's very different use of community first responders, and the ability to be a second operative on our rapid response vehicles to aid the clinician at incidents, and particularly with the PPE requirements, personal protective equipment requirements. I'm intending to keep those arrangements open for as long as I think it's right to do so. So that's in terms of maintaining our COVID response and our preparedness should there be a second wave of the virus. I would want to recognise the creativity from some of our CFRs. So recognising in North Wales, our community first responders did come together and have stood up a 24/7 falls response unit, and that's been quite active over the last period. So it's great to see the ingenuity and creativity that we often see in this group of volunteers continuing. So as we know, the R rate is reducing, which is a good indication that the virus presence in our community is reducing. So alongside this shift, the team and I are turning our thinking towards a resumption of more regular CFR arrangements. It's also good that we know that we have good level 3 PPE supply chains, and so with these positions in mind, what we are starting to look at is the resumption of regular dispatch arrangements, which would be coupled with some assurance that training for level 3 PPE and access to the equipment for level 3 PPE is deliverable and sustainable. And I'm confident that we can do that. So I'm optimistic now that in the next few weeks, we will commence our pathway to resumption of a more regular CFR dispatch approach. In terms of the volunteering strategy, there was a good amount of work done, and that's not going to be effort in vain. Actually, just as the pandemic was began to take hold, we had an almost draft version of the document that I was intending to commence sharing and some broader consultation. Now, at the moment, and of course we as an executive have been having many discussions now in establishing the right balance between our COVID response and the resumption of IMTP activity. Of course, the volunteer strategy has always been one of our organisational ambitions. I think at the current time, the bandwidth just doesn't currently exist particularly within my management team, to take the strategy forward right now. But more importantly, of course, the strategy is just the start of a pathway. And I think importantly, we have to reflect on whether we have the bandwidth to deliver on the strategy equally. And right now, I just simply don't think that we have the ability to do that within the way that perhaps we may have done business previously. So what I'm actually intending to do is to talk to our volunteers at our now scheduled Q&A session, which will take place next Thursday. So I'm going to speak directly with our Q&As, and I'm going to explore whether there is an opportunity to perhaps utilise some of the expertise and skills of our volunteers in perhaps beginning to work on our strategy whilst the organisation is looking at other priority items. So you mentioned training there, Estelle. It's quite exciting to see that there's been collaborative working on the virtual training space, and I'm expecting virtual training to roll out into our volunteer element as well. So, you know, I would always add a huge thank you to our volunteers and for those as well that are sticking with us during this really challenging time. I mentioned at the last board particularly as well, thanks for our volunteers, their contribution's invaluable, and I'm looking forward to working with them as we make attempts to resume our more regular approach.
Thanks, Lee. That's really helpful. I hope those colleagues who posted the questions found that response helpful. And as Lee said, there is a live session for all CFRs next Thursday. If you haven't had the details already, they will be coming through to you. And I'm really conscious that you may have further questions or want to respond to what Lee has said. So there will be a whole opportunity focused on volunteers next week for you to do that. I'm also conscious that on the Facebook feed, there are some other questions for Lee, but I'm going to give him a breather for a second and move to my colleague Claire Vaughan, who's our Director of Workforce and Organisational Development, because we have a couple of questions from colleagues on Facebook who've joined us. One is a really good, well, they're both really positive actually. One is a question about online training, and is all the training for WAST going to move to an online platform henceforward? So that's one. And the second one is we have a colleague who would like to join us in either UCA or EMT capacity in South East Wales and is interested to know when we might next be recruiting. So I wonder if you can take those in whichever order you feel comfortable, Claire.
Thanks, Estelle. Let's take them in order that you posed them first. So on the digital training opportunities, obviously what we have been able to do at pace with the EMT, the Emergency Medical Technician course, has really begun to open up the potential and opportunities to do more. So Lee's just talked about there around how we can look at volunteer training. We know that the team are looking now at how we deliver some of our continuous professional development and our statutory and mandatory updating training, whereas we have traditionally brought people from across Wales together into a single venue to deliver that training. We now have a far more agile, a far easier way to reach people through, you know, medium like this and Zoom and other things to update them on safeguarding and IPC things. What we won't see, I don't think yet, is a full online delivery of all training that we do, because there are some courses, and I'm thinking about particularly, for example, our urgent care service and our urgent care assistant training, where individuals are coming completely new into the organisation with no clinical knowledge or updating, and that needs to be delivered in a slightly different way. But again, there may be some elements of that training that we can consider pushing online when the time is right. So this is a developing piece, and it's an exciting developing piece, and it's something that we are, from ambulance perspective, certainly leading the way on and sharing with a lot of our colleagues across the UK about what we've done, how we've done that, and broader into some of the health boards as well, just to show that it can be done. So I would watch this space, and at some point the materials then will also be available for people online as well, so that they can look at the training materials. On the UCA urgent care assistant or emergency medical technician recruitment, this year for the EMT, we're probably not going to see any open adverts for that until later in the year, towards the end of this year. But we certainly will be advertising for urgent care assistants and continue to do so. So that is an ongoing supply of staff that we need, where we see a lot of growth. We have some developments in the Aneurin Bevan area coming on track as well, which will see us looking for more people again. So my advice to the individual who asked the question, sorry, I can't see who it is at the moment, is to keep their eye on NHS jobs. If helpful, to keep their eye on the Facebook page and our social media streams, to contact us with their details and let us know who they are and that they're interested, so we can keep their details and we can let them know when the next opportunity opens up. But I would anticipate that will be fairly soon.
Thank you, Claire. And I think it was another Claire Harris, who posed that question. So Claire, if you're still with us online, keep your eyes out on the NHS Jobs website, which is www.jobs.nhs.uk, and have a shifty there and you'll see what we have available. So Lee, back to you. You're a very popular chat this morning. We have a query from one of our colleagues, Stacey, who's with us on Facebook, about why she hasn't seen so many managers out on the front line during the pandemic. Feels that perhaps we could have been more visible at hospitals, etc., with our road staff. I wondered whether you'd just like to address Stacey's concern there.
Hi, thanks, Estelle. So this one has been one that we as a team, in fact, have had lots of discussion about, because ordinarily, and many of us would appreciate this, at times of difficulty, instinctively you want to go, be amongst our people, and show face, physically show face. And we have sought, I think, to first of all create the right balance, recognizing that some of the restrictions that are in place just simply don't complement that, particularly in our earlier stages where essential travel is clearly a key consideration, what's essential versus what's not. More recently, the distance restrictions in terms of travel, and of course recognizing the health and safety implications, not just in terms of contracting, but also in terms of spreading, the potential for spreading as well. And actually, as an executive, or if I take an executive angle first, I think we've worked very hard and sought to create the right balance between visibility on site, and I know as one of us who spent more time in the office and around VPH than away, but equally we've sought to demonstrate to our workforce that if you are working remotely or you're unable to attend work for other reasons, you're shielding, you're working from home, that actually that equally is the right thing to do. So I know at the executive level we've sought to find balance in that. But of course, what we haven't been able to do is just simply rock around, turn up at hospitals, turn up on stations, because exactly the risks of either contracting or spreading. And of course, there's a lot less managers to go around. And so keeping managers protected is going to be a key part of our ability to sustain our leadership. Now, I know more locally that there's been a significant pull on our management teams at a local level. We've got a whole raft of structures that are in place across specialisms and more general response and recovery, and there has been a significant pull on management capacity in order to service that, and I think that that's just had to be our priority. Lastly, I think I would just say that I think the efforts to make ourselves visible in a different way has been one of the most strongly fed back items, I think, during some of the debriefing activity that's been underway on our phase 1. The Q&A sessions, the flow of communications, Estelle, so I would absolutely recognise the great work from our comms team, because keeping that communication flowing has been a real art. So there's been equally great opportunities for us to learn for the future. So best attempts have been done to get that balance right, but this has just not been a normal type situation for us.
Thank you, Lee. That's really helpful. And I hope, Stacey, if you're still with us, you feel that was a helpful response. Martin, I'm really mindful of time. So if it's okay with everyone, I'll probably wrap it up there. I'm sure everybody's ready for a cup of tea now and a quick break. But I did just want to thank everybody who's stayed with us on Facebook and on Zoom to listen to this question and answer session and the items that came before it, all of which I think were really interesting, and hopefully our colleagues who are watching found them interesting too. I wonder if I could ask anybody who is still there in the ether, if they've got any comments they wish to log on Facebook in relation to how they felt that Q&A session went, then it would be very helpful to see them, because this is the first time we've done this, Martin, and we're blazing a trail here as a Welsh Ambulance Service Board. I'm not aware of any other health organisation in Wales who is doing this online question and answer session as part of their board session, and in fact doing a completely digital board as opposed to all of us sitting in a room and streaming it through Facebook. So very happy to get some feedback, and also from my board colleagues offline, if that's helpful, because each time we do this we hope it'll get better. So for first effort, thank you everybody for your time, and back over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Stella. Just worth picking up on that point about management profile, to say also there's an issue there about the board's profile, which we've had to wrestle with, myself as chairman and my non-executive director colleagues. And it's the issue of essential versus non-essential travel surfaces, with the issue of spread of coronavirus surfaced. And in fact, we also formally have a number of non-executive directors who are shielding. So difficult discussions. Instinct says, or heart says, want to get out there, want to carry on with the connection. Head says we have to do the sensible thing, both to protect ourselves and our staff, and comply with Welsh Government guidance. So it's been frustrating, but for us, we concluded that the wisest thing to do was to work virtually. And as somebody who's been out, I think, on a dozen full-day ambulance ride-outs, you know, that's been a real shock for me, because that connection with the front line is hugely important. And I just look forward to the day when we can resume that. I think Lee's point is well made about using the technology available to us to further the connection in a different way. Hence today, with the opportunity to have this kind of discussion. Not perfect, but I think it was the kind of wise decision in the end. On that note, yeah, I think probably a break is in order. We're running behind schedule. What I was going to say was, let's take 10 minutes, and obviously I hope that public colleagues will stay for the latter part of the meeting, and we'll leave that with you. So let's resume at 12. Realistically, I think we'll aim to finish at 1 o'clock. We're not going to hit the original deadline. We'll just accept that the closing part of the meeting will last for approximately an hour. So if you could work on that assumption, and we will continue. I'll see you in a few minutes. I think we're just about midday. Have we got most people back, do you think?
Yeah.
We'll just give it a second. Okay, I think we should make a start. A number of people have rejoined us. And for those of our public and staff who are still on Facebook or Zoom, I hope we provide an entertaining latter part of the meeting. Realistically, I think this is probably going to take us up close to 1 o'clock, for which I apologise. But obviously, the earlier item with the patient's story was a very important discussion, so I was pleased to let that run. So I think, Rachel, first up, it's yourself with, as we go into the sort of performance and look ahead stuff, to give us an update on the integrated medium term plan and how we start to switch on new switch our priorities back on. Over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Martin. So conscious of time and the fact that we've got a fair bit to get through still in the last hour of the report, as you mentioned, I'll try to be brief. So you've got the paper in front of you, and I suppose the first sections just give you a reminder of where we've got to with the IMTP. We submitted it back in January. It hasn't been approved, but it's approvable, I think was the phrase that was given to us by Welsh Government colleagues. But subsequently, because of COVID, there's been a slight change of emphasis clearly within Welsh Government, and they're looking really to us to move to a quarterly planning cycle for this year, as we try to respond flexibly to the requirements of the COVID pandemic. And you'll recall there on page 2, the framework that we use to support our Q1 plan, which is around continuing to respond flexibly to the pandemic, supporting our staff throughout, learning from and keeping what's worked, and then restarting important elements and programs of work from our IMTP. And on page 3 and 4, we've given you a little bit of an update on some of those key IMTP priority areas. We are working through a kind of full review of where we are against each of those IMTP deliverables. There were 30 in total, and in terms of what has been able to be achieved to date and what hasn't. And once that's finished, we will update the board. But as I say, page 3 and 4 gives you a little bit of an update on some of the most important deliverables that we've been working on. Jason, in his remarks earlier, talked about the demand and capacity review, and the work that has continued in relation to recruitment and training in that programme, which is going very well. We've put a bullet point there around the work that we've had to continue in terms of working with an Iron Bevan University health boards to think about the opening of the Grange Hospital. So that work is continuing. There are considerations in terms of whether it would be potentially possible to open the hospital earlier than the original planned March date. That is something that an Iron Bevan are considering and will inform us about in due course, but we're working very closely with them to look at the transport implications of all of that. So that's work ongoing. And you can see there a couple of other key things in terms of 111 implementation. We are still looking forward to rolling out 111 into the Cwmtaf Morgannwg area, potentially in the autumn, although that obviously is subject to all the normal readiness assessment checks that we do as part of the 111 rollout. So lots of work still ongoing. And I think one of the things that we put further down in the assessment section of this report is that we've got a number of different kind of calls on us. So we've got our IMTP deliverables that we as a board signed up to. We know we've got some additional priorities that arose from our Q1 plan this year, arising from the pandemic and the work that's brought with it. We've got operational guidance that has been issued now from Welsh Government in terms of Q2. And we know also in terms of being a key partner in the unscheduled care field, we've got the unscheduled care system are looking to develop a series of deliverables for this year. So we've got a lot of priorities, I suppose, pressing on us as an organisation. And one of the things we've mentioned on paragraph 9 is that as an exec team, we've been considering how do we consider which of those things could be a priority if, as is likely, we'll be unable to do all of those as we might wish. And we actually had a very good discussion at our exec management team meeting yesterday, which is setting out and agreeing a series of principles which will help us to make choices about the things that we speed up on, the things perhaps we go a bit slower on, recognising that resources are limited in terms of the ability to do everything that we might want to do at the pace we might want to do it. So we'll bring those back in our next report for you once we've written those up. And as part of that process, again, an update really from this paper on paragraph 13, we noted that normally in normal times we'd used the Strategic Transformation Board as an executive-led board to monitor and progress against the IMTP. That has been stood down during the pandemic, height of the pandemic in the last few months. But we have just agreed, so there's an update from the paper here, we've just agreed yesterday that we will stand that back up again, not quite as frequently in terms of how often that meets as previous, but we do recognise that we need that internal time to consider the priorities, to monitor progress against them, and to potentially reprioritise flexibly depending on the situations as we see it, particularly as we know we might need to be planning for further increases in COVID activity potentially. So I think that's that. In terms of one of the points to note, I suppose, is that in terms of our Q2 plan, we've got to submit that by July the 3rd, and we do have a one-item board meeting, I think, that has gone in now on the 2nd of July, that's next Thursday, where we'll bring forward the plan, the Q2 plan for you to review and sign off, hopefully, so that we could submit on the 3rd. As we discussed in relation to the Q1 plan, we tried to make it and that did look forward into Q2 anyway. So there will be a lot of it that will be building on the work of Q1, which you'll already have seen. But there will be a couple of areas where we'll be responding to feedback from Welsh Government, adding in some further detail around some key issues, other things which have emerged in the last few weeks that are becoming a priority for us. Probably a bit more around modelling data that we're reviewing and will be utilising in terms of our plans. So you'll be able to see all of that next week. So I will pause there and see whether there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. That's really helpful. I was going to ask Jason whether you had any kind of reflections on the back of Rachel's introduction.
Thanks, Martin. Nothing specifically to say, perhaps other than 2 points. So the Q2 plan, as we know, will respond to the Q2 operating framework that government have set out. As Rachel's described, we intend to build on the Q1 plan and the feedback we've had. It will look slightly further ahead than Q2, so it will take us into winter, and we'll be looking at some of the things in the Q2 plan that we'll need to ready for winter in Q3 Q3 and Q4, and it will also make a couple of offers to the system, if you like. So whilst it will, primarily focus on what we need to do as an organisation across our service lines in 111, EMS, and 999, and NEPS. It will also focus on a couple of areas where we've got a wider role to play as one of the only national clinical service provider here in Wales. And perhaps just a final point I'd make, and Rachel alluded to this in regards the IMTP and kind of priority actions that we'll be taking going forward. And this does connect to a bit of the conversation before the break. It is that we're not out of the pandemic yet. And we're still very much, particularly in operations and with Rachel's business continuity and recovery cell, still very much focused on response, albeit at the back end of the response phase to wave 1 of the pandemic. So we do have to have some controls in place, if I could describe it to the board like that, around what activities we choose to turn back on, in what order and at what pace. And indeed, the executive team had a detailed conversation yesterday about how we're going to put those control measures, what control measures we're going to put in place, and what assessment we're going to make of tasks. So I think it's just right to signal that whilst we do have emerging capacity as we come out of the acute response phase to the pandemic, we're still very much in it, and it's not back to business as usual yet, and probably won't be for a number of months yet.
That's helpful. If you don't mind, I'll just ask Stephen if you've got any comment, just looking at our world from a commissioner perspective. If you don't worry, but it's just if you have any reflections you wanted to throw in there.
Thanks, Jay. Yes, thanks for the invite. I appreciate that. It's sort of to echo the comments I think that both Rachel and Jason have been making. I think in terms of a reflection on how, as an organisation, have you responded to the first wave of the pandemic. I think you can hold your heads up high. So I think as an organisation, you've done very well in that regard. And one of the things that is being talked about nationally, the phrase "the new normal" is being talked about, and it would be a shame to lose some of the good things that have been put in place very quickly in the first wave. So that sort of building on the point that Jason was making there, I think you're in a position where you could be a little bit more proactive and make an offer to the wider system, not just waiting for to look at what others are saying and then how do you respond to that. I think, and that fits in with the shift left scenario that we've been talking about from a commissioning point of view for some time. Your ambition in terms of core handler for choice and how you're working, and the fact that you're hosting 111 as a service. So I think there are a number of things that will be very beneficial for you and for the system. We need to place that properly, and we need to do a manageable number of things really well, or propose to do a manageable number of things really well. And we've been talking those through those things collectively and collaboratively. So really to echo the comments that both Jason and Rachel have been making, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. That's really helpful. Jason, I don't know whether you wanted to comment on Stephen's comment.
Well, only that he and I, with support from Rachel, have been close through the response phase to the pandemic. We're alive to the fact we've got to do both now. So we've got to continue to respond to the pandemic as we come out of that wave 1 and prepare for any further waves. That's a crucial part of what we're doing now, and also into Q2 to ensure we're resilient for anything else that comes along, but at the same time start to recover and turn back on some of the activities that we've inevitably had to pause over the last 3 or 4 months. And there are choices difficult, and they will be tough choices that we'll have to make as an executive team, but also as a board, I suspect, on some matters in the next couple of months about those things that we had ambitions to do and might not be able to do them in the shape or at the pace that we wanted to or aspired to, given where we now find ourselves for a range of reasons. So I think that's just worth saying. On Stephen's point about an offer to the system, I'm alive to this, and as I said in my remarks earlier, I do think the time is right now for us to put some of those things that we've been talking about out to the system, because there are some things that we can do and we see as a national provider that regional colleagues in health boards don't. There are connections we can make. So there is a wider role for us to play, as we've discussed before, as a board strategically, and given the challenges that exist and the pressure that exists in the system, going into what is going to be an unknown winter this year in terms of what's the impact of coronavirus going to be on flu and on the seasonal activity we see through winter. I think the time is right for us to lean forward a bit on some of those and prioritise them in Q2.
Well, that's really helpful. I've got one comment in the margin. Paul, I don't know whether you want to make it verbally, which is about health board plans.
Yeah, just thought, Chair, it might be worth Rachel giving us some assurances around the links with health boards and in terms of when they are switching activity on and our ability to fulfil their requirements. I know she mentioned the Grange Hospital particularly, but all health boards are starting to think about what their new normal is, and just want to make sure that we are fully involved in those discussions. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good point, and I think one of the things we found in the Q1 plans is that it was hard for health boards at that point a few weeks ago to really articulate in any kind of meaningful sense from our perspective, exactly what they would be able to switch on and off at that point. So we were not really much better informed as a result of Q1. Obviously, we've got a few more weeks under the belt now. Welsh Government have done quite a lot more modelling to support health boards in looking at the type of capacity they need available and they need to have in terms of moving forward through into winter. So we've got a group internally which we established. Initially, it was part of the Surge Field Hospitals work, and that group is continuing. So that's got ops, planning, nets on that group. And we've got links now into all of the health board areas to gain intelligence from them. Now, it's not easy, and I still don't think in the Q2 plans it will be very completely obvious what we may need to support or not. But we have got those links in. I meet with directors of planning regularly. We've got forums where we get together every week, and we've got most of the directors here have got links into health boards through their various professional groupings as well. So I think we have got a fair bit of intelligence, but I think it's still going to be quite loose in Q2. I think it is very hard for health boards to nail this one down, I think.
I think that's expected, isn't it?
Yeah.
As Jason has said, it's a very fluid time, really. But as long as we've got those links, we can move quite quickly in terms of assessing what the implications are for us. So that's what I was looking for, and that's what you've given us. Thank you.
That's good. Got a question from Emrys, which is a tricky one in the sense that the issue of capital availability is one where you're going to have to thrash around outside of an open board meeting because it's quite a sensitive subject. But have you got any comment on that point, Rachel? I don't know, Emrys, whether you wanted to elaborate on the point in any way.
I just wanted to flag up or to understand if there is any impact from a reduction in our sort of discretionary capital, and what impact that may or may not have on IMTP or the second quarter plus activities. I think I'm not saying that we should have it. What I'm saying is, if it has an impact, we should recognise that and flag it.
I think Jason's bursting to come in here. I can see that.
Well, I wouldn't say bursting, Martin, but I mean, just to respond to the point, yes, there's a very real potential for that MRIS. I mean, I think what I would say is that, you know, it is not yet clear whether there will be any adjustment to the discretionary capital allocation for us this year, but there is a risk that there could be, and if there is an adjustment to that, inevitably that will go down and not up. And that will have an impact on either the schemes and the projects that we wanted to do this year in the IMTP, or through the capital, you know, the annual discretionary capital program, or the pace at which we do them, or the order in which we do them. So we're very much alive to the fact that yeah, that there may well be a need to adjust some of those things. Chris, I think, took finance committee through that recently, and we're, you know, almost watching it. Certainly this week, we've been almost watching it on a daily basis. So we're alive to the fact we may well need to respond quickly. But at the moment, you know, we've still got the plans in place for to you know, work on the full allocation for capital this year. We'll just have to see what happens, and then prioritise those schemes we have left, you know, on the list, within the scope of what we end up with.
Yes, thanks, Jason. I just wanted to ensure that if there is an impact, we don't get held accountable for the fact that we haven't delivered. That's all.
Understood, Emrys. I mean, you know, clearly Chris is close to the central finance team. You know, Rachel and I are staying close to Stephen in his role as Chief Ambulance Service Commissioner, and also will report any, you know, variation from the IMTP through ESC as well. So I think it's an open question at the moment, and until we've, you know, got a landed position on what the capital envelope, the full capital envelope, is going to be, it's a bit hard to call at the moment.
Great, thank you.
I think we should probably draw this to a close. The report is what it is, Rachel. I don't know whether there's anything you wanted to add. We've got a couple of recommendations which are about noting the report, haven't we?
Yeah. Nothing further to add from my perspective. Thank you.
Just looking at one margin comment there. So back to that. Sorry, was that a comment?
Martin, I just wanted to ask about the WAS readiness in terms of responding to health boards as they starting to come back, to go back to the new normal, if you like, for want of a better word, given that they've not been able to articulate exactly what they are going to be doing. How quick can we respond to the health board's demands, given that we're still in the management of COVID at this moment in time?
Perhaps if I could just answer that, Chantal.
Yeah.
As part of our Q2 planning and work that we've got underway internally, we're working on a range of scenarios. So we're looking at, you know, what we think might be a good winter for us, what might be a average, and what might be a horrendous winter. And I think that our plans will attempt to land, I suppose, where we think it's most likely to be, and that would be a mix of COVID activity, business back to normal, hospital handover delays. So we're trying to think about what's the mix that's most likely. But our plans, what I think we're trying to develop is a sense of flexibility. So if we plan for a certain scenario and then activity and demand increases significantly, what are the things we've got in place to be able to quickly increase our capacity in order to meet that demand? So I think the lessons from the first phase of COVID have been really helpful, because I think we've put in place an awful lot of processes and mechanisms that do help us to flex activity, capacity up and down, and some of those will remain with us as things that we can deploy through into further surges of demand. So definitely our plan will be thinking about that. So even if we don't know the precise details of what health boards are going to do, we'll be planning for a range of scenarios, if that's helpful.
Yes, thanks very much for that, Rachel. Thank you.
Good point. Thanks, Chantal, for that. So, Rachel, should we move to the two recommendations at the end of the report, which are to note progress and the risks that you've highlighted?
Yeah.
You comfortable that we do that?
Yes.
Good report. Yeah, helpful. Folks, are we happy to receive that report? I think it's a very helpful update. but almost immediately superseded by the Framework 2 plan, the Quarter 2 plan, of course, which we'll return to. But nonetheless, important that we saw that. I think you're probably still on your feet, aren't you, for the next item, which is the performance report for the monthly performance report. I think we're going to have to take it as read here, aren't we, in large part? So it's a case of whether there are any, particular points you wanted to draw out rather than going through the whole thing.
I'm happy to be guided by you, Martin. I think, I suppose, as you say, it does speak for itself, and the SBAR pulls out, some of the key issues that sit in the data behind. I suppose the two things just on the report itself I wanted to mention. One is that, if you recall, in the last year, we'd moved to a position where we were trying to align the actions we were taking with the performance indicators. So what are the actions from our IMTP that will drive improvements in a particular indicator? And we rated those, and we had a fair bit of discussion, didn't we, around, actions could be green, but performance could still be red, and we know that that's an area we need to kind of work further on. So I suppose I just wanted to note that we've, at this stage of the year, because of all the changes in our IMT, having to pause certain things, having to take on board new deliverables in certain areas, that bit of the report probably isn't as well thought through as it should be, and it's a kind of work in progress as we start developing our priorities for this year and know which order we're going to be doing things in. So it was just to note that that's probably not as well thought through as it might be in other reports. It's also a report that we've talked about a number of times, and I do want to kind of reshape a little bit going forward. But again, a number of my team have been in recent weeks supporting core services in some of this activity, so we've not had the time yet, but it will be an important part for me and my team to just review this report. I think you need to do that every so often anyway, to make sure that it's fit for purpose, and we know that there are some things we want to do to improve it. But it is what it is for today.
Nonetheless, it does helpfully pull out a number of our key indicators that we've worked hard to define. I'll ask a question if I may, just taking the report as read, but I'm interested in the whole issue of hear and treat, and that our stats in that area, which are obviously been impacted by the pandemic, and what the prognosis is going ahead, because we've invested quite heavily in that potential, but it's a complicated world, and I realise that with the pandemic, many things have intruded. So I just wondered whether we would expect to see an upturn in hear and treat performance as we move back to a more conventional arrangement.
I mean, Lee, you may well want to come in on that. If I just in terms of a couple of observations from my perspective, I think it's a key part of the demand and capacity review. So the ability or the feasibility of improving our hear and treat rate is articulated in the demand and capacity review, and I put it in there in the SBAR. It kind of identified that potentially we should be able to get to 10.2%. And so that is a piece of work that we know we need to do now to look at improving towards that level. Some of that work has been on hold as a result of the pandemic. So that's one of the deliverables, one of the elements of the D&C program that we haven't been focusing on as much in the last few months as, for example, the recruitment and training element. But through our program boards, we are looking at how we can step up and step back into some of these areas of work. There was an issue very early on in the pandemic when the 111 service was kind of overwhelmed, where they weren't able to support some of the hear and treat work in the same way as they normally do, and so that affected our overall performance in that regard. But that's picking back up again now, as you can see. But I'm just from an ops perspective, Lee, I don't know whether you want to come in on that. You're mute.
You must be mute.
A couple of points, thank you, Rachel. A couple of points would feed into that, Chair. So in the earlier period, we saw our 111 provision focus on 111, which meant some of our green activity was not moved into our 111 service as would be normal. That's now resumed as we have created the additional capacity in the 111 service to manage the additional demand, and we are starting to see that demand return to normal levels. There is a piece in here for me which it is the point at which our clinicians access an incident, and that's whether it's occurring pre-dispatch or whether it's occurring as a result of incidents waiting for dispatch. And of course, what we've seen over the last few months is a reduction in our demand. That will have a percentage impact as well, but a reduction in our EMS demand and an improved or a lessening of patient waiting times, which means there's less incidents waiting on a pending dispatch list for clinicians to then access. So I think that has fed into the outputs for the clinical desk. In terms of so what next? The CCC clinical review is one of the items that's on our list to resurrect, and as soon as capacity presents itself, we shall do that. I've asked for an initial piece of work, which is to just reassess the recommendations from that review. Remembering the review actually concluded prior to the pandemic, so I think we need to just test fitness now in the current position on the recommendations that were made, so that we can continue to develop the CCC clinical offering. The other part, I think, too, will be interesting to see the potential benefits of the diversification of the clinical skill, and of course the mental health piece of work that's just been ongoing will be perhaps our first look at that, because the more we can diversify the clinical offering, the potential for additional pathways that could open up for us. As I've been engaging with my colleagues, one of the seeds that I am beginning to sow is for colleagues to really contemplate and seriously consider the potential for opening up additional pathways based on remote clinical decision making, where some are reserved only following face-to-face assessments. And I think we can potentially do more if we could open up access from remote clinical decision and remote clinical assessments versus just traditional send someone, do a face-to-face, and at that point be able to access a pathway, because that could negate the potential use of the ambulance resource to begin with. But I hope some of that helps, Chair.
That's a really good answer and well considered. That's helpful. Brendan has just said, could he just come in on I know, Jason, you want to come in on some other wider issues, but Brendan just wanted to pick up something on Hear and Treat as well, and then we'll move across to you, Jason.
Yes, thanks, Martin. I think that in the post-COVID world, we're going to see a whole new review of how clinicians get the information to patients. So both Hear and Treat and See and Treat pathways are likely to change considerably. And there are some opportunities for us within that. For example, the use of Consultant Connect, although it's being used initially as in the front line, that could give us better access into some of these direct pathways where clinicians in the hospitals might require some confidence initially about us diverting the correct patients, particularly if it's prior to a face-to-face consultation. So I think there's a whole load of work there, and I think maybe the traditional parameters that we've been measuring around Hear and Treat and See and Treat may need to be reviewed in the post-COVID clinical world.
Thank you, Brendan. Sorry, I was muted. That's really helpful. I mean, there's clearly some major thought going into this now. So I welcome the fact you're reflecting a different future, which is good. Jason, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Perhaps it's just to wrap this performance conversation up. Can I take us to indicator 9 on slide 12 of the pack, please? And this is just to alert the board. I mean, this is a deeply operational point, but it's just worth calling out. So if we look at the top left-hand graph there on emergency ambulance unit hour production, you'll see that we saw a steep increase in February and March in hours produced on the EMS fleet. And this is principally as a result of three things. Overtime incentives, which were deployed in response to the pandemic, which doubled overtime uptake of our own people. Support from Defence through the provision of 60 soldiers acting as non-clinical emergency ambulance drivers, and a reduction in underlying absence, which led to an improved position, a considerably improved position on unit hour production on the emergency ambulance fleet. That's been delivered at a time when we've had lower core activity, considerably lower core activity, by some 15 or 20%, and also we've seen a near eradication of emergency department handover delays, which has meant there's more capacity available in the emergency ambulance fleet, and thus we've had much stronger response performance across all categories of call than we would otherwise normally see with the capacity we routinely deploy. So I just want to call out to the board and signal to the board that as we begin to back out the additional surge capacity that we've deployed through the response phase of the pandemic, overtime incentives, defence support particularly, we will see production reduce. And as activity returns to normal, which it has started to do, and regrettably we've also started to see an increase in some locations of emergency department handover delays taking capacity away, we will see response performance decline. Now that's not to say we aren't taking other mitigating actions to continue to deliver the best we can, and we've touched on two just now. One is Consultant Connect and alternative pathways. The other one is doing more through Hear and Treat and stretching that as far as we can in line with the demand and capacity review. And of course the other big thing we've got going on is the recruitment of 136 people, which to grow the frontline service, which I touched on in my report at the beginning of the meeting, and we're over halfway through that process already. But it suffice to say, the response performance we've seen over the last couple of months will come under increasing pressure in the next couple of weeks, and it's just right, I think, from a transparency perspective, to be absolutely clear that we will begin to see that picture emerge. Rachel and I discussed that with Stephen last week from a commissioner's perspective. I don't know, Lee, if you want to add anything to that, because it is deeply operational, but it's clearly strategic in terms of the wider service delivery too.
I'd have nothing to add to that, Jason. I think you summarised it really well.
And Stephen, as you're on, we've touched on this at our last meeting. So it should be familiar territory to you as well.
Yes, Chair, yes, it is familiar territory. And I think you're right in the way that you look at it as an organisation, trying to get that balance between taking advantage of where you've been able to do additional things through COVID and other opportunities that are coming your way in terms of the shifting left discussion. I think that's absolutely right that you do that. It's really important that through EASC and through Unscheduled Care Board, we're taking these matters to them as well, so we get that joined up approach. A decrease in some of the performance is understandable, I think, as things come back to normal or the new normal. But what we need to make sure about is that we're doing that in a managed way. And as the Commissioner, you'd all be expecting me to be pushing you as hard as I could to make sure that we're getting that balance right in terms of our ability to deliver within the resources that are available. Also, I take this opportunity to just give you your board assurance that as far as worsening handover delays are concerned, continue to take that very seriously. There is in the Q2 returns that you talked about earlier, health boards are being required to address that. So it's included as part of the sort of overall performance management, not just between ourselves in discussion. So we'll be doing the best we can collectively to make sure that we're getting this balance right across the system.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I think we should, as Jason has hinted, we should draw this to a close and note the report. If you're happy for us to do that, Rachel, having introduced it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to have to be a bit brutal about the last reports. Take them as read and limit to key points only, I think. So, Chris, we're on to Finance Month 2, unless I've misplaced the order of batting. I know there's a big discussion to be had about capital availability, which is not for this meeting because it's, you know, a very sort of open-ended business item. So I guess on the finances, we just really want to consider anything on the revenue side of things now, anything that's really salient, and take the report as read.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that's summarised it quite nicely, actually. I was just going to highlight sort of 2 or 3 brief elements of the report, taking it as read, given it's month 2, so it's still sort of fairly early days in the financial year, and not to say that we haven't been focusing on 2021, but obviously until the last few days, we've been focusing on closing the 1920 accounts off as well as a team. So it's a balanced position as we've come into the financial year over the first 2 months, with the big caveat, of course, now coming in, building on what I said earlier, I guess, in terms of costs that we are now incurring, particularly on the revenue side as a result of the pandemic, and the assumptions within the position of that being funded from government. There is a brief update on that from government this week, in that to make the month 3 and the first quarter positions as clean, if you like, as we're going to be able to. There is going to start to be some funding moved out of government on the back of our month 2 returns at a level for certain aspects, maybe not to cover all of the costs we've incurred yet, but certainly some of the additional staffing and some of the additional PPE type costs that we've incurred as a result of the pandemic, we hopefully will see come through as funding allocations to support this by the time we report month 3. So we'll have a similar position, hopefully, but we won't have the bigger sort of assumption around funding to flow, because hopefully it'll be in the books by then in that way. So that was the main sort of highlight within this. It's still based on a set of budgets that have been translated from what the board approved in March. Detailed discussions at a senior budget holder level are kicking off now. We would normally have done these by now, but for obvious reasons, we've had a bit of a delay in doing them. But we got meetings in with individual directors to go through in some detail their budgets, and we're also meeting more collectively as an executive finance group, in particular focusing on the residual savings requirement, because there is still a sizable savings requirement to deliver in this financial year, and an element of which we haven't got plans completely for yet, and I'd plan to work up through this period. As you say, the capital element of this paper is probably a bit lighter this month than it normally would be. It's for a reason that we'll pick up in separate discussions around where capital funding is landing this financial year. But apart from that, it's say a balanced position on a run rate that we continued through for the last couple of years now on a monthly basis, and have managed to not sort of bounce back up as we enter into a financial year, but with some more work to do to make sure we continue that trend as we go through the rest of the year. But obviously, as ever, happy to take questions.
I'll go to Martin as chair of finance and performance. I won't make you chair of audit for this question.
Thanks, Martin.
What's your take on things?
Well, just a couple of general points. One is to note that there is a savings target within this year, financial year. I made it recently, that remark about last year's performance, but it's worth noting the same. And the other thing is to notice, just on page 6 of the report, is whilst we're in balance pretty well, I've made this point in previous board meetings, Chairman, and that is that whilst we're in balance, there's a lot of overspends being offset by a lot of underspends. And that's how, at the moment, we're managing to break even. I think that's a situation we need to start looking at a bit more rigorously, I guess, over the coming months. And I think that point was made. But at the moment, I would say, bottom line, there's no panic at the moment. The funding framework in this financial year is probably, not probably, is more than likely going to be affected by the coronavirus outbreak, and then there might be some sort of pullback of funds back into the centre, hopefully on a non-recurring basis. But I mean, it's a little bit more uncertain, I suggest, than maybe in previous years as a consequence of the coronavirus. I mean, So that's all I wanted to say, Chairman.
No, that's helpful. And the inference of your comment about budget overs and unders would be that that's something that Finance and Performance Committee can do some assurance work on.
We will look at that, Chairman, and yeah, that's an important part of the governance framework within the Finance and Performance Committee. Yes.
Okay, I think we'll take it on the capital front, Chris. That this is for in the spirit of openness for our public listeners. That because of the volatile nature of the capital position and funding availability, we need to have a prioritisation discussion. So we have to do that in closed board session after this meeting, because it's a complex subject, and the outcome of that will come back to a public board. So that's why we're not covering the capital piece in any detail here today. Should we move to just note the report? Chris, are you happy that we do that?
Yeah, of course, Chair. Just to come back on that last comment, I suppose, as Martin says, we will take some of the detail behind that through Finance Performance Committee. I would sort of respond by saying, actually, I don't think there is as many over and underspends as there used to be now. If you look at the table on page 6, we have addressed a significant level of that as part of the budget setting. There's one or two areas that we still need to address, but there's particular reasons for that within the current position, some of which is COVID driven. But we'll take the detail of that and obviously provide perhaps a little bit more assurance to Martin as Chair of Finance Performance Committee on that through that committee rather than direct the board.
Yeah, that's great. And there is a comment in the margin from Chantal, I think, about the fact that with the new normal, you've got new requirements around things like training and education, which will have financial implications. So I guess that's part of the world we have to deal with, isn't it?
It is indeed. It's absolutely the new normal, a phrase that everybody uses, isn't it? But I have to say there is, nationally across my Director of Finance colleagues, some concerns, if you like, about the affordability of the new normal and who's going to pay for it. So there's a lot to go to understand what that new normal is, but actually how it's actually going to get resourced as well.
Yeah. Okay, so let's note the report if everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to risk management. Keith, I think that will be you, will it not? Oh, it's Claire, I'm sorry. Do apologise.
That's quite okay. That's okay, Chair. Thank you very much. So this is a very short report. It has been to Audit Committee where it was discussed at length, but I wanted to bring it to board because it represents quite a crossroads in our risk management journey and quite a shift actually in the way in which we are seeking to move to a new rhythm of managing risk is how I would describe it. And the real driver for this has been the fact that we now have all of our risks recorded in our electronic risk register. We have a whole repository of risks in one place, and that has been a really critical part of our journey in moving to being a risk-enabled organisation. The conversation that we had at Audit Committee is that actually now that we have all of those risks on our electronic risk register that are updated frequently and much more in a real-time manner, it actually was at odds with the way we were traditionally presenting our risk register in providing a quarterly risk register report to Audit Committee that of course was retrospective in its nature and looking back at the previous quarter. And therefore, what we now need to do is have a different approach to how we present our corporate risk register and our risk management reports. And what we will be aiming to do is, rather than providing a look back, retrospective quarterly report of those risks on our corporate risk register, we will be bringing to Audit Committee a risk management report that details recent activity and that will be supported by use of the electronic risk register to be able to enable us to review risks in a far more timely and more dynamic way. And that really is the essence of the paper. It does definitely feel, I personally think, as a real crossroads in our risk management journey. And of course, over the next couple of months, we will be testing that and refining it. The Assistant Director Leadership team have a key role in this, whereby they will be increasing their rhythm of reviewing risks, which will not just be quarterly, but actually will be on a monthly basis. And clearly then I will be bringing that into EMT frequently, so that we are consistently and very frequently reviewing and updating the corporate risk register.
That is really good news. The important message there about moving from retrospective to actually a live presentation of things that reflects current circumstance, which will make a huge difference to our assurance levels. So that's been through audit committee, Claire. So I'd just turn to Pam for perhaps a view on that on behalf of the committee, because that's an important forum that it's been through.
Yes, thanks, Martin. Yes, we very much welcomed the move towards real-time reporting, because only having the audit committee on a quarterly basis meant that you were often looking back rather than looking at real-time information. So that was very welcome. And also an acknowledgement that each of the risks is assigned to a particular board committee, so they equally will have access to real-time risk position for their scrutiny, because the audit committee role is more about being sure there is a process of risk management in place, rather than scrutinising the individual risks, so they fall to the other committees. And we're fortunate that the non-exec director members of audit committee are each chairs of their own board committee, so that provides an excellent link on this as well as a number of other fronts. So yeah, happy to see how this goes. We'll have our first presentation of it at the September meeting.
So watch this space. Really good news. Welcome that indeed. Love to have a discussion now, but it probably isn't time. I think it's an important report nonetheless, and we should congratulate you on it. I think we're asked to receive and explicitly note the transition, Claire, that we're going through with this step up in our management of risk.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
So is everybody happy to do that?
Yeah.
Well done, thank you. And while you're on your feet, would you mind covering the patient safety highlight report, which incidentally, I think next time around we need to move up the agenda. It's too late in the proceedings. There's symbolism in where we consider items, isn't there? So for the future, we'll look at that.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. So obviously the patient safety highlight report now comes to Trust Board, every other Trust Board. So I think it's really important to note that the purpose of the report really is to provide an update to Trust Board on the key information relating to putting things right and patient safety. This report, of course, is retrospective, and that is probably in line with the timing that it comes to every other board. So this report specifically focuses on Q4, on January, February and March of this year. Just accepting that people will have read the report, I think it's quite helpful just to highlight a few things. The first one being that it's very, very important to read this report in the context of the quarter, and therefore on page 3 there is a very brief summary there of the activity in this quarter, both in relation to the incidents that we have obviously attended and in relation to the call volumes that we have taken. And I think that is important when obviously you continue to go through the report and look at volumes of concerns or of incidents, or obviously of serious adverse incidents. There's a couple of key points there that present to the context of the report, and obviously in January and February we were still pre-pandemic, we were still, obviously in winter, and experiencing the pressures of the unscheduled care system, and obviously the, point 4 there does highlight the increase that we saw in the lost hours to our handover delays, but also in point 3, recognises, as Lee and Jason have spoken about, in terms of us seeing a slight reduction in our demand. So I do feel it's very important, and this is something that we've done on the first occasion with this report. And again, this is an iterative report because it's actually only the third time that we have brought the patient highlight report into the open Trust Board arena. So again, I welcome views and comments from colleagues in how this can evolve, but the context I think is really important. In terms of, you know, the themes and the trends of our serious incidents, which is obviously really important and contributes to our learning, if you move down to paragraph 20, that very, very clearly explains some of the high-level themes and trends from this quarter's portfolio of serious adverse incidents. And then if you move down to paragraph 24, there is some examples there of some of the, so what have we done? What has been some of the immediate learning that we have learnt, both from those incidents or from previous incidents where we have obviously sought to put in different measures, different interventions, whereby our incidents have pointed to improvements that we needed to make, and essentially you know, that loop of quality assurance and quality improvement. The third point I just wanted to make, moving down to page 7, is particularly in relation to our performance in, you know, obviously the tier 1 targets of the putting things right process. And it is important to note that we have seen a reduction in our performance, particularly in March. We saw a reduction both in our 2-day acknowledgement, which I know I have raised before with the board, but also in terms of our 30-day response. However, that being said, I think it is important to note in paragraph 29 that there is a real focus at the moment on moving forward to improve this performance, and we have both in April and May you know, seen that performance start to go back up, which is really important for me to provide some assurance to Trust Board. It's also really important, I think, to make sure that, you know, we do bear in mind that the story behind statistics sometimes is very, very important. And certainly there is a graph on page 4 which is around serious adverse incidents reported to Welsh Government, aligned obviously to our health board partners, and you know, it looks there as if there is a significant difference for ComTAF based on January 19 to January 20. But what we do need to bear in mind there, the context of the fact that obviously the borders, the boundaries of ComTAF have changed, and if that had been in the existing boundaries, then actually that would look very different, because 2 of those incidents in relation to ComTAF Health Board there would have been attributed back in January 19 to Swansea Bay Health Board. So I just wanted to point that out, because I think sometimes with graphs and statistics, they can tell a story that needs to be able to be informed by a little bit of context. So I'll stop there. I mean, the report speaks for itself. Clearly, the team are very focused now on us getting back to a position where we are responding to the public in a timely manner, and we are seeking to conduct our investigations within that 30-day time period, which is challenging because our investigations, when we need to undertake them, are very detailed and need to be done certainly in the context of our CCC and the systems of our clinical contact centre, and certainly during the pandemic, those people that undertake our investigations have been needed to be redirected to operational frontline duties. But as we start to see those people coming back and supporting the function of the team, you know, I am confident that we will be able to retrieve that performance and respond to the public in the manner and the timeliness with which they, you know, expect and deserve.
Thank you, Claire. Really, really good. I'll go to Emrys as Chair of Quest for any comments that he might have.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, we understand the situation. We've had, or I've had a specific conversation with Claire on this subject. We have had issues with getting responses to investigations, as well as people from Claire's team being redeployed. But as these people are coming back, we're looking forward to a significant improvement in certainly 2-day responses, and then going forward to the 30-day response.
Thank you, Emrys. I think Bethan has made a positive comment about some of the performance improvement that's evidenced in the report. I think my point stands about this perhaps featuring further up the main board agenda than it is today. It feels as though we do it a disservice this far down the performance list. So I think we should look at that offline, but note the report for today. I did like very much the improvement stuff that you'd included about lessons learned. Thought that was a really good step forward. And what I'd like to think about is how we maintain this item on every board agenda rather than every other board agenda. I think it's of such importance to our public that's something we should look at. Probably isn't the time to have a discussion today. So are we happy to have to note the report for now?
Yes.
I think Emma said yes. He's on mute.
Yes.
I think.
No, I'm happy.
Yeah, yes, I do. Thank you.
Martin. Okay, let's do that and appreciate the work's gone into it, because that brings us somewhat behind schedule to the end of the meat of the business. So we'll leap into procedural matters and consent items as quickly as possible if you'll bear with me. So, and Keith, I'll look to your support here in case I muddle this. We've got the minutes of the 28th of May to approve. They have done the rounds and I've certainly commented, and I suspect executives have as well. I won't go through them by page, but are there any comments people want to make by way of accuracy? If not, we can adopt them. Okay, happy with those?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, let's agree those. Matters arising not elsewhere. We've got the action log, Keith. I don't know whether you want to draw anything out from that.
Yes, all the actions are up to date in terms of explanations, so I think they're self-evident. In terms of the top two, there has been some progress since we updated it in the sense that we'll be bringing stuff now to the July board in respect to terms of reference for a university committee, but all the other actions have got explanations against them and are up to date.
Are we happy to receive that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that update, Keith. I was aware the university thing had moved on even beyond the updated schedule, hadn't it? And then we've got the item I referred to at the beginning, which is tucked away but included because it's important to complete the loop, Keith, isn't it, around the governance of the urgent care staff pay negotiation. I don't know whether you want to just quickly steer us through that. So it's the chair's action, and then there's the link to a report which rolls the remuneration committee into that, isn't there?
Yeah, so we got the minutes of the chair's action, which took place in early June. The chair's action considered the cost of the proposal, having received information from the remuneration committee that met immediately before it. Everything was subject to Welsh Government approval before it could be progressed. Chair's action approved that it goes forward to the Welsh Government, so it has. And then we've now provided a quick update to say that Welsh Government have approved it, and it's back with us now to finalise the finer details. So some very good progress on that.
So the board governance piece is complete. The detail of the agreement is obviously being worked through with trade union partners, which is out with our remit. But in terms of our governance piece and part in the process, that is concluded.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So we're asked to formally ratify the chair's action decision as a board?
That's correct, yes, to ratify the decision.
Are people happy with that? There's a record there.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Does that complete us with procedural matters, Keith? Have we missed anything?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay, then we've got committee updates, which we're going to have to be quick with. But Paul, we did have a People and Culture committee in the last round, didn't we? And we've got a briefing there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The briefing's there. It was a very good committee meeting. It was held in June. We didn't have the April one, and we spent a lot of time looking at our response and planning for COVID. And you'll see that despite COVID, there's been significant progress made in all areas. And I think the first thing that the committee did was put a shout out to all our teams across the organisation who worked so hard during the coronavirus episode, and continue to do so. So the information is there. We've got our next meeting in July the 14th. You will recall that there were issues around internal audit and the assurance rating for some of the workforce and OD audits. So we're going to take that in more detail at the July meeting and look at the actions and refer back then to the audit committee and give assurance that way. But the committee assurance framework enables us to do that quite effectively. So it's there for people's information. Any questions, happy for myself or Claire to respond.
Okay, it's a very good report. Thank you for that. It's a very active committee, in fact, huge agenda. Any questions for now, if not offline for you or Claire? Okay, I'll take silence as content. It's a vibrant committee, I think we describe it as. Pam, I know we haven't formally got an item for the audit committee briefing. There is a briefing there. Is there anything you wanted to add to what we've not, by way of things we haven't covered today? Because I know you met last week.
Yeah, just a quick one, Martin, please. We've already covered the annual accounts, which obviously was a key part of the meeting and the reason it was delayed by a month from May to June. We also looked at the revised internal audit plan for this year because the one presented in March hadn't been formally approved, and obviously as a consequence of the pandemic there's been a number of changes to that. So the revised plan was approved, although we recognise it may need to remain flexible dependent on how the pandemic develops or not. There was quite a degree of discussion about the outstanding recommendations which are on the audit tracker, and we recognise that because of the pandemic then very little had been done in response to those recommendations in the last quarter. So I know that work is restarting on that and we look forward to seeing that in the September meeting, but in particular to look at it through a lens of prioritisation, risk mitigation or risk tolerance. So I've had a conversation with Jason about that and he's taking that to his exec team. And then the final thing I wanted to raise was about counter fraud. We were in a position to approve their annual report, their annual plan for the new year. And I'd like to say that counter fraud are doing an excellent job. There's much more focus on it, even though they're reduced in terms of manpower because of help to other parts of the organisation. But a lot of good work goes on in counter fraud. So there was some significant approvals there. But I think I'll just draw a line there, Martin. Thank you.
That's really helpful. There's a lot of good work goes on in audit committee as well from that evidence. So thank you for that. I'll move on if I may. That was short and sweet. Ideally in a meeting we'd have more time for committee briefing, so we'll need to look at that. We've got a block of committee minutes to sign off if you're happy to. Those will have been approved by the relevant committees. So you've got People and Culture, Audit Committee, Charitable Funds. Are we happy to block approve those? We've got East minutes there are for information, so that they're not for us to agree, but they're there for your perusal at your leisure. And then we're into any other business. And Jason, I think you've got a couple of items you want to raise.
Yes, thanks, Martin. So the first one is that this week is Pride. Sorry, not this week. This month is Pride Month, and as an LGBTQ plus friendly organisation and one that normally takes part in the Pride March in Cardiff, we'll be supporting the virtual Pride tomorrow, NHS Pride tomorrow, and we would encourage colleagues across the organisation to partake in that. Of course, our work here, as I touched on earlier, with the Black Lives Matters issue, is around providing a safe workspace, an inclusive workspace for all our people, and of course the community that we serve across across Wales. So I'd encourage colleagues to take part in that if they can, and there'll be some material which the team, Estelle's team, will be circulating online and on social media to raise awareness of that.
That's your. Sorry, I thought there was another item, but apologise.
There is another item, Martin. I was just waiting to see if there was a response from that. The second one is just for the board to formally note that since we last met, one of our long-standing community first responders sadly passed away. So this is Brian Foley. He'd been with us for a very long time and was one of our original CFRs here in Team West. Brian was in hospital for an operation and sadly died following a short illness there. So we did mark that internally at the time, but this is the first time the board has formally met since then. So I just think it's right we note Brian's contribution over many years and send our condolences to Brian's family and friends and his colleagues, of course, on station at Barry and in the CFR community, who will miss him greatly.
Thank you, Jason. That's very timely, and I did write to his family on our behalf, but that's much appreciated for highlighting it. Thank you. And I've known him for some years, and he's been an immense contributor on the CFR front. So that's a somber thought. On your first point, Jason, we'll just leave a second if people have any comment. You paused for the first item, and of course, I thought you were going to mention the second one. Happy to just take those items of AOB.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, folks. Well, we've made the end with a bit of a rush there, which is probably a lesson for the future. So I'm grateful to you all for your forbearance. But we got through the business. I think there's some very useful items there. So we're next due to meet on the 30th of July, and I'm working on the assumption that will be once again a meeting where the public can view us and hopefully also submit questions. We seem to have moved seamlessly into the world where we're taking questions as they occur. So we'll take a stock of that and feedback as to whether that's working, and we continue it. I very much hope that we do. So thank you to board members and other partners who've joined us today, and also our public and staff who've had the patience to sit through this, because it can't be entertaining all of the time, even when my phone rings. We do have a closed board session, which is really for items that you can't take in public because they need the kind of discussion that it would not be possible to have in a public arena. But I'll give you my assurance, they do come back to the board in due course. So we have got a closed session of the board, which will follow quite shortly. I just wanted to remind people that will be on Teams as a meeting. So we switch medium for the meeting. We were afforded 15 minutes break, I believe, between the two sessions. I just wanted to test with those who are staying for the closed session how long you would consider reasonable to bolt a sandwich before we resume. Are you happy to say 15 minutes?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
As they say in the comedy program, take a long lunch hour. Okay, so we'll come back in. You need to come back in on your Teams link for the closed board. And of course, anything that comes out of that will be reported to public board in due course. So thank you all for your contributions. Thank you, everybody who's joined us. Look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.